After laying the foundation for her American dream, the only thing left was to look for love.
She was a student that was doing awesome in the classroom, and she was working hard at her job.
She was chasing her dreams.
And then she met a guy who she thought was the one.
They both worked very, very hard to get to where they were and to be successful.
But on what seems like an ordinary spring night, she vanishes without a trace.
Her parents are freaking out because this isn't like her.
This is clear in their faces that something is wrong, something catastrophic.
They obtained the last number that she had been texting with.
I don't know what you want from me.
Look, all we want is some information.
As detectives piece together the facts, they learn of a love turned sour.
Their relationship was tumultuous. They were arguing all the time. They fought all the time.
She started to suspect he was cheating on her.
You really think I'm stupid, don't you?
No.
I'm done.
They know there has to be something bigger going on here.
This is likely a matter of foul play.
But can investigators rescue her before it's too late?
It was time to check the trunk.
They were afraid of what they might find.
See what's inside.
March 31st, 2018. It's a balmy Saturday night in Orlando, Florida.
Orlando is just a working class area where you have great people, families that are just trying to do the best they can.
It's the theme park capital of the world, so that draws a lot of people from all over the world.
A lot of immigrants settle in Orlando because it's easy to find stable work at one of the many amusement parks.
But at 11 p.m., one local couple is starting to worry about their eldest daughter, 23-year-old Vanessa Coakley.
She should be back by now.
Vanessa was living with her parents at the time.
She left earlier that evening around 8 p.m. to go hang out with friends, but they hadn't heard from her since.
Hours have gone by and no word from Vanessa. She has not returned home. She has not called her parents and said that she would be staying out for the night.
And the next day, Vanessa had to go to work. It just seemed very out of character.
She was actually excited about a new job that she was starting at Disney. Vanessa is not someone who goes and stays out all night and does a lot of partying. She works hard.
Hi, you reached Vanessa. Sorry I missed your call. You want to leave your name and your number? I'll give you a call back. Bye.
Vanessa, give me a call, a text, or something. Let me know where you are.
After several repeated calls, no answer from Vanessa, her parents said, okay, let's go to bed and maybe we'll figure out things in the morning. Maybe she'll be back in the morning.
But the next morning, their concern only escalates.
Vanessa still isn't home. There's been no contact from her, no trace of Vanessa.
Honey, still no answer from Vanessa. Check your phone.
And this type of behavior is just not normal for Vanessa, especially being that she had to be to work the next morning very early.
Her parents tried calling Vanessa's job to see if she has clocked in.
She never misses work. There's no way she would have done anything to jeopardize her job.
But after speaking to her boss, their worst fears are realized.
She didn't come to work today.
Her parents are now starting to freak out. They're worried because this isn't like her.
Something really isn't right.
Born and raised in the French West Indies on the Caribbean island of St. Martin, Vanessa Coakley and her family immigrated to the United States after she graduated high school.
They moved to America for new opportunities and for the American dream.
After they settled in Orlando, Vanessa immediately got to work helping to provide for her family.
Her first job here was as a cashier at a local supermarket.
Still, Vanessa had bigger dreams for her future.
She knew she wanted to go into the medical field, and she knew she needed an education to do that.
She enrolled in a technical college. There, she started studying to become a medical assistant.
Vanessa was so excited that she would actually come home and take the blood pressure of her siblings in order to practice so that she would be on her game the next time she went back to class.
Obviously, Vanessa was super busy between work and school, but she still made time to spend time with her family, with her friends, and she enjoyed going out with guys, going on dates.
She definitely enjoyed cruising the dating apps, as many single young people in their 20s do.
But when Vanessa went out on a date with 32-year-old Christian Penchie, she realized she may finally be able to delete those dating apps.
I had such an amazing time with you tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And it was great finally being able to spend some time together, in person.
Christian was 32 years old, almost 10 years Vanessa's senior. He was more mature than the guys her age.
He was a divorced dad. He had 3 kids. And Vanessa really respected the way that he had stayed in his kids' lives.
Family was something they both really prioritized.
Christian was also a fellow immigrant.
He immigrated to Orlando from Puerto Rico when he was only 11 years old.
I would love to know more about your journey if you want to hang out again.
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely hang out again.
They came from similar immigration stories. They both had the American dream of coming to the U.S. to build a future for their families and make sure that their families were taken care of.
They both worked very, very hard to get to where they were and to be successful in this country. So both of them very much related on that.
They also related on their love for God.
Actually, would you be interested in maybe going to church with me tomorrow?
Of course, I'd love to.
Christian was very involved at his church. He served a number of roles. He was a custodian, he was an usher, he was a mechanic at the church, as well as the graphic designer that designed the weekly program.
I'll see you in the morning then.
See you then.
After meeting Christian, Vanessa truly believed her search for love was over.
Vanessa thought Christian was the one. She thought this guy was someone that she could spend the rest of her life with.
But after dating him for 2 years, she realized it wasn't meant to be.
She suspected he was cheating on her, and she wasn't going to put up with that.
It was a heartbreaking loss, but Vanessa wasn't one to sulk in the pain.
Vanessa decided to not allow the breakup to keep her down. She knew her worth, she knew her value, and she decided to move on.
She dusted off her dating wings, and she got back out there.
But not without keeping work and school as her priority.
By the spring of 2018, she was just 7 months away from graduation. Vanessa had made a 4.0 and got on the president's list of her college.
And as graduation neared, Vanessa secured an exciting new job to help pay for her tuition expenses.
She accepted a position at a coffee shop at Disney World and was beginning to train for her new position.
But now, Vanessa has seemingly vanished without a trace.
She didn't come to work today.
Her parents are freaking out because they don't know where she is.
Something really isn't right.
After 48 hours pass with no sign of Vanessa, her parents' concern reaches an all-time high.
This is clear that something is wrong. Not just something is wrong, something catastrophic has happened.
In the spring of 2018, 23-year-old college student Vanessa Coakley was just 7 months away from graduation.
She was working towards her medical assistant certification.
She was a student that was doing awesome in the classroom.
On top of juggling work and school, Vanessa had just jumped back into the dating scene following the end of a 2-year relationship.
She was getting back out there, throwing herself into the dating pool. She was starting to make new connections.
But now, Vanessa has vanished, and her family can't contain their fears any longer.
Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on April 2nd, that's when Vanessa's family heads to the sheriff's office to file a missing persons police report.
Family members tell investigators that they haven't talked to their daughter. They haven't seen her since Saturday at 8 p.m. when she left home.
Did she say where she was going or who she was going to be with?
No.
And you tried calling her?
Yes, multiple times. She's not responding to our text either.
They told the sheriff's office that this type of behavior is completely not like their 23-year-old daughter. She lives on her cell phone. She always has it handy.
She has never gone this long without checking in with her parents. This is totally odd behavior for Vanessa.
We even tried calling her new job, and they haven't heard from her either.
She would never be a no-call or no-show.
Vanessa's parents knew how responsible Vanessa was. It was not like her to skip out on work or responsibilities.
Vanessa's parents say they've been so desperate to track down their daughter that they've done some detective work of their own.
Since Vanessa's phone is on the plan with her parents were able to reach out to the phone company to obtain the last number that she had been texting with.
The number belonged to a man named Domingo Sandoval.
But she's never mentioned his name before.
He might be a friend from work or school.
Vanessa's parents don't recognize that name, and they have no idea of the relationship that he may have had with Vanessa.
Do you think you can find him? Maybe he knows where Vanessa is.
We will work on tracking him down immediately.
Detectives locate an address for Domingo in southwest Orlando and head to the home.
Domingo Sandoval?
Yes?
We have some questions for you concerning Miss Vanessa Coakley. Can we come in?
But as soon as they mention Vanessa by name, Domingo freezes up. He gets cagey.
And then a young woman comes to the door.
What's going on?
It's nothing, babe. I'll handle it.
Okay.
He agrees to speak to the police, but he wanted to talk to the police outside because he did not want his girlfriend to hear the conversation.
Detectives can't help but find this suspicious.
I don't know what you want from me.
Look, all we want is some information.
After the investigators tell Domingo that Vanessa has been reported missing, he starts to get really nervous.
Look, I barely know the girl.
When investigators ask Domingo about his relationship with Vanessa, he tells them that he met her online through a dating app a couple of weeks ago.
Domingo claims they only communicated through online messaging and through text. They never met in person.
He was attempting to hide his relationship with Vanessa from his girlfriend. She didn't even know that Vanessa existed or that Domingo had a dating profile.
Now, we know you talked to her on Saturday, and you were the last person she was in contact with.
She sent me a text message saying she was going out, but I never heard from her again.
Did she say where she was going?
No.
He admits he may have been the last person to talk to her Saturday night. However, he's adamant that he had nothing to do with her disappearance.
Look, there's another person you may want to talk to, though.
While he and detectives were talking, he mentioned that Vanessa had complained a lot about her ex-boyfriend, Christian Pinchy.
Domingo claimed that Vanessa told him when she and Christian were dating, their relationship was tumultuous. They were arguing all the time, they fought all the time, and they broke up last year.
The way she would talk about him, I don't know. It didn't sound like things were completely over to me.
According to Domingo, Vanessa had recently told him that Christian had suddenly reached back out to her.
And he was trying to win her back.
Orlando investigators searching for 23-year-old Vanessa Coakley have determined that the last person she spoke to before her disappearance was a man named Domingo Sandoval.
Domingo was a local man who she met through one of her online dating apps.
As investigators questioned Domingo about Vanessa's disappearance, He maintains that he knows nothing.
However, Domingo says there's another man police should look into. Vanessa's ex, Christian Penchie.
It didn't sound like things were completely over to me.
He says that Vanessa told him Christian had recently reached back out to her, trying to get back together.
Maybe she decided to get back with Christian, and that's who she went out with Saturday night.
Look, I swear I had nothing to do with her disappearance.
Domingo allows investigators to go through his phone. And as they're going through the text messages and calls, it seems like Domingo's story is adding up.
The messages between Domingo and Vanessa seem innocent enough, and there's no reason for them to believe that anything he said wasn't true.
The last 2 messages that Vanessa sent to Domingo were sent around 9 p.m. the day she disappeared.
Vanessa sent a selfie and a text message that followed that said, if I don't respond, I'm out.
The text messages also appear to confirm Domingo's concerns about Christian Penchie.
Vanessa had been complaining to him about her ex-boyfriend, Christian.
Vanessa's text wrote, "He wants to get back with me, but I can't because I don't see him like that anymore."
From everything they've seen so far, it appears that Domingo has been telling the truth.
However, when they ask him to come back down to the station so they can download his phone records and he can give a formal statement, he does something that surprises them.
All right.
Look, man, I have answered all of your questions. Do I need to get a lawyer involved or something?
He's starting to feel like he's a suspect.
He tells investigators that he's been cooperative enough and that he refuses to go back to the station.
While Domingo's behavior is suspicious, it's not enough to bring him back to the station by force.
They still don't have a body or any physical evidence, so Vanessa's still just missing.
And detectives are still hoping to locate her before it's too late.
After learning about Vanessa's ex, Christian Penchie, and that he was trying to get back together with her, detectives want to speak with Christian firsthand.
Could Christian have something to do with Vanessa's disappearance?
But they quickly hit a dead end.
He's not an easy guy to get a hold of.
They do find a phone number, but when they called, no one answered.
So detectives ask Vanessa's family to come back to the station to speak with them.
Detectives were hoping that her family would have more information on Christian.
So we didn't find Vanessa with Domingo, but he did let us know about a recent ex of hers, Christian Penchie. Do you know him?
Yeah, we met Christian. They broke up about a year ago.
Over the course of the relationship, Vanessa's family says they got to know Christian fairly well.
Vanessa and Christian's relationship went on for 2 years. Even though they argued and they fought, they continued to stay together for a while.
The couple officially broke up in 2017.
As for the reason for their breakup, loved ones say it was the result of infidelity in the relationship.
Christian, have you seen my phone?
No, baby, I haven't.
Christian! What are these?
Those aren't yours?
No!
Vanessa started to suspect Christian was cheating on her, and she wasn't the type of person to put up with something like that.
Who is she?
Babe, what do you mean?
She was a no-nonsense person. She was not going to tolerate cheating. So she decided to leave the relationship.
You really think I'm stupid, don't you? I'm done.
Wait, Vanessa! Wait!
Do you think that maybe she was going to meet with Christian on the night that she disappeared?
It's certainly possible.
After speaking with Vanessa's family, detectives are determined to speak with Christian as soon as possible.
Do you know where this guy lives? The address on his license and registration is no longer valid.
He was living in an apartment complex in South Orlando.
They learned that Christian had been staying at a motel that had turned into a condominium complex.
She's able to provide detectives with the name of the apartment complex, but she doesn't know the specific apartment number.
Detectives head to the location in search of Christian, hoping Vanessa is there with him.
It's possible that she was ashamed of getting back with her ex and didn't want anybody to know about it.
Maybe they were both laying low until they figured out their relationship.
When detectives arrive, they make contact with the apartment manager.
We're looking for someone named Christian Pinchy. Does he live here?
It's not ringing a bell, but let me check my records.
Unfortunately, the apartment manager isn't able to give detectives the information they're hoping for.
The manager didn't find any record of Christian Pinchy living there.
We do have some tenants who are currently subletting their apartments. My coworker Mike has that information. He'll be in later this afternoon.
Okay, great. When he gets in, can you have him give me a call?
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
At this point, detectives are running thin on leads and short on hope of finding any trace of Vanessa, until her family makes another crucial discovery.
Hi, Mr. Coakley.
Around 6:30 p.m. on April 4th, investigators get a call from Vanessa's father.
He says they had just found Vanessa's car abandoned in an Orlando parking lot.
Okay, we'll be right there.
When investigators arrived to the parking lot where Vanessa's car was found, they realized that it's right around the corner from her college.
In the front seat, they are able to find Vanessa's book bag containing her school ID as well as her school books.
Fortunately, there doesn't appear to be any blood evidence or any sign of struggle in the vehicle's interior.
But after investigators finish searching the interior, there's one more place to look.
So far, they hadn't discovered anything that really stood out, but now it's time to check the trunk.
Investigators are scared of what they might find.
Let's see what's inside.
Two days after Vanessa Coakley's parents reported her missing, police in Orlando, Florida have made little headway in tracking her down.
They were really coming up empty. They had zero leads on Vanessa's whereabouts.
But now, investigators have received a new tip from Vanessa's family. They've managed to locate her missing vehicle.
So far, they hadn't discovered anything that really stood out, but now it's time to check the trunk.
Well, let's see what's inside.
They were afraid of what they might find in the trunk.
When they pop it open, they don't find any signs of Vanessa inside.
However, they do find other evidence in the back of the vehicle. Vanessa's purse was found in the trunk, containing her credit card and her debit card, as well as her passport and other ID cards.
Although Vanessa is still nowhere to be found, locating her belongings places an ominous cloud on the investigation.
This is more evidence that this is likely a matter of foul play. Because why else would she abandon her ID card, her purse, and her money?
They know there has to be something bigger going on here. And the longer they go without finding her, the worse that feeling gets.
Just then, Vanessa's father returns to the scene. He says he may have uncovered another important clue.
Yeah. Our youngest daughter just called. She found something. Information from Vanessa's phone.
Vanessa's sister was able to log into the family's shared Google account and able to pinpoint Vanessa's last known location.
The phone stopped transmitting on exactly 11:59 p.m. on the night of March 31st, just a few hours after Vanessa left her parents' home.
But what's more important is where her phone was last seen. The condominium complex where police believe Vanessa's ex-boyfriend Christian was last living.
This once again points them in Christian's direction. It's an amazing lead.
Thanks.
The family truly was an invaluable resource in this case.
Armed with this new lead, investigators head back over to the apartment complex.
It's about a half a mile away from the location of her car.
Hey, detectives. Mike just got here. Mike!
Hey, detectives. How are you? I just took a look at our sublet records, and I'm not seeing the name Christian Pinchy anywhere. Is there a possibility that he goes by a different name?
Not that we know of, but do you mind if we look around and speak to some of your other tenants?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Detectives are determined Christian lives somewhere in the complex and has been subletting his unit under the table.
They started knocking on doors and talking to neighbors and showing them Christian's picture.
Yes. All right, sorry to bother you. Can we ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
We're looking for this man. His name is Christian Penchy. Have you seen him around here?
Yes, he lives right there.
One neighbor immediately recognized Christian's picture. She says he lives next door to her.
She hadn't seen him for a few days.
The last time she saw Christian was on the morning of April 1st when he was loading a small TV into the back of his car.
Good morning, Christian.
Oh, hey, good
Hi,
morning.
you need help with that?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Okay. But I haven't seen him around here since.
What about this woman?
No, never seen her before.
She has not seen anybody coming or going from his apartment since that day.
Despite what Christian's neighbor says, they check to see if Christian is home.
When police knock on Christian's door, there's no answer, so police set up surveillance and wait for him to return.
However, as the hours go by, it seems less and less likely that Christian is coming back anytime soon.
As day turns to night, impatience begins setting in for detectives.
Investigators were fearing that Vanessa could be in imminent danger. They needed to get in quickly.
So the next day, they obtain a search warrant to enter the unit without Christian.
Immediately upon entering the apartment, it's clear that something is wrong.
They're hit with the smell of decomposition.
For 3 days, Florida police have been investigating the mysterious disappearance of young college student and Caribbean native Vanessa Coakley. Now, new evidence has led them to the apartment of her ex-boyfriend, Christian Penchy.
Immediately upon entering the apartment, it's clear that something is wrong.
They're hit with the smell of decomposition.
The smell leads them back to the bathroom.
And in the bathroom, they discover what they've been dreading all along.
Vanessa is buried face down in the bathroom under a bunch of blankets.
It's clear Vanessa's death was the result of foul play.
Vanessa's death was no accident. They were able to see that she had been shot in the head and left to die.
Based on the level of decomposition, investigators believe that Vanessa was killed on the same night she left home, which means she's been dead in Christian's apartment for almost a week.
You can tell CS had to come in. We found her.
As tragic of a discovery as this is, detectives now feel confident that Christian Penchy is Vanessa's killer. They just need to find him.
Investigators searched Christian's apartment from top to bottom, but there is no evidence that could point to where Christian may have gone.
But since he took the TV with him, detectives have one idea on a possible way to track him down.
Maybe he pawned the TV to make some quick cash before going on the run.
When investigators check local pawn shops for their recent transactions, their hunch pays off.
Just a few hours before Vanessa was reported missing by her family, investigators are able to determine that Christian made some sort of transaction at a pawn shop. And it wasn't a TV that Christian had pawned. In fact, it was a .38 caliber handgun.
Detectives don't think this is just a coincidence.
Investigators are confident that this gun is the one that was used to kill Vanessa, so they immediately seize it and take it in as evidence.
But investigators haven't gotten any closer to tracking down Christian Penchy.
They have officers scouring the city for him as detectives continue to search for leads.
And it turns out police aren't the only ones looking for Christian.
Police get an unexpected call from Christian's brother, Marco, who lives out of town.
He's trying to file a missing persons report for Christian since he hasn't spoken to him since April 1st.
The officer I spoke to said he could help me with locating my brother.
Marco goes on to say he's worried about his brother because he's been going through a lot lately. He was recently fired from his job.
Marco also knows that Christian bought a gun a few weeks earlier. And based on his recent depression, he's afraid that his brother could have done something to hurt himself.
Marco says he has been looking everywhere for Christian and is convinced something terrible has happened.
We're looking for him too.
Why?
He's wanted in connection to a local homicide.
You mean, you think he killed someone?
Marco has no idea that his brother is suspected of committing murder.
He says this is completely out of character for Christian.
Are you sure?
Yes. His ex-girlfriend's body was located in his apartment. Well, we'll keep searching for him. But if you find out anything, you'll let us know, all right?
Yes.
But before police can search any further, they receive copies of Christian's most recent transactions from his bank.
Once investigators get their hands on Christian's bank records, they get a crucial key to finding him.
They find a transaction on April 2nd that stands out to them.
He bought a plane ticket to Puerto Rico.
After days of searching for missing woman Vanessa Coakley, Florida police discovered her body inside the Orlando apartment of her ex-boyfriend, Christian Penchie.
No one knew where she was for over 5 days, and when they finally found her, she was gone. Vanessa had tragically been shot in the head.
When the family is informed, they are crushed. They have basically been working just as hard as the detectives to find her.
She was a beautiful soul. She did not deserve this.
Now, after reviewing Christian's bank records, detectives believe they've discovered where he's hiding.
There's a particular transaction on April 2nd that stands out to investigators.
2 days after Vanessa disappeared, he booked a flight back home to his native country of Puerto Rico.
Investigators immediately reach out to the airline to confirm that Christian actually boarded the flight that day.
He was definitely on that flight. Now it looks like investigators will need to call in assistance from Puerto Rico.
Florida police reached out to authorities in Puerto Rico and basically explained the entire case to them. They immediately launch a manhunt in order to track down Christian and get him behind bars.
But to everyone's surprise, Christian beats them to it.
On April 6th, 1 week after Vanessa disappeared from her parents' home, Christian turns himself into law enforcement in Puerto Rico.
He knew the jig was up.
Christian is quickly extradited back to Orlando. And once investigators get him into the interrogation room, it didn't take long for Christian to confess to everything.
I just missed her, you know? And I thought that we could work things out.
Christian explained the weeks leading up to Vanessa's death, he had tried everything he could to rekindle their relationship. He realized he made a mistake and he wanted her back.
She was right. I cheated. But I knew that I could make things right.
Christian insisted things would be different this time.
However, Vanessa wasn't having it.
Despite Christian's efforts, Vanessa was reluctant to get back with him. Wasn't sure if she could ever trust him again.
She was also interested in where things might go with Domingo, who she didn't realize was a cheater too.
I didn't want to give up this time. So I invited her over to my apartment just to talk.
And when he invited her to his home on the night of March 31st, she reluctantly agreed to join him.
Hey, thanks for coming, Vanessa. Really means a lot.
You're welcome.
They talked for a while, and at the beginning, things seemed to be going well between them. But before long, an argument broke out.
What did you want to talk about?
Come on, Vanessa, it's straightforward. I've been asking you just for another chance to make things right.
You're not listening. Christian, I'm done.
Vanessa was still harboring some resentment around what had caused the breakup.
She wasn't interested in giving him a second chance at a relationship with her. She was standing firm.
I've told you I'm different.
I do not believe you, Christian. I don't.
But
I need a minute.
no, wait.
No.
Christian said that the argument escalated and Vanessa went into the bathroom to be alone. And that's when he felt an overwhelming sense of rage come over him.
And I just couldn't calm myself down. I was so angry that she wasn't getting it.
When there is intense anxiety or anger and you're flooded with these emotions, it can shut down that judgment and planning part of your brain. So you are strictly in fight or flight. And during that time, it's very difficult to make rational choices, not make impulsive choices.
He grabbed his gun and forced his way into the bathroom.
What are you doing?
There, he raised his .38 caliber handgun and shot her once in the head, killing her instantly.
But once Christian came down from the high, he instantly realized what he'd just done.
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
He says that he started to panic. He didn't know what to do.
Christian says he covered Vanessa's body with blankets. Then he tried to cover up his trail.
He knew he needed to get her car out of his parking lot, so he drove it to another parking lot down the road and walked back home.
He then disposed of her keys and her phone.
I knew that I needed to get out of town, but I needed to make sure that my kids were okay.
He said he dropped off his TV at his ex-wife's house just so he could see his kids one last time, but didn't tell them anything about what happened.
Christian's next move was to get rid of the murder weapon.
He pawned the gun at the pawn shop and purchased a ticket to Puerto Rico to go home.
He thought he could hide out there, but despite all he had done to cover his tracks, he realized the police were hot on his trail.
The guilt, it was just eating me.
He decided to turn himself in and face the music.
In a situation like this, where it was somebody who he claimed to really have cared about, it is likely that these events were weighing heavy on his heart, and sometimes people confess because they just don't want to carry the guilt anymore.
It's a harrowing tale, and for investigators, it's the confession they were hoping for.
Everything that Christian's telling them is lining up with the evidence, and they believe he's telling the truth.
He said he wasn't himself, but in the eyes of the law, that does nothing to lessen the responsibility that he now has to pay for the crime that he committed.
Christian Penchie is charged with first-degree murder and booked into Orange County Jail.
Everyone who knew him was absolutely stunned. He had no history of violence or a criminal background.
Having already confessed to Vanessa's murder, Christian doesn't stand much of a chance at trial. So he eventually agrees to plead guilty to second-degree murder and throw himself at the mercy of the court.
At the sentencing hearing on April 12, 2019, Vanessa's family read their victim impact statements, and to say they were powerful is an understatement. They were tearful and emotional.
This was a girl who was deeply admired by her friends, by her family, and you could tell that it really left a negative impact, left a void in the family.
Christian also offers a statement of his own.
Christian's statement was, "I am sorry. I am deeply sorry. It wasn't me. It was something out of the ordinary."
He claimed he was under the influence of some kind of drugs, but he never specified what kind of drugs he had taken.
Will the court show him leniency?
When the judge handed down the sentence to Christian, he threw the book at him. He didn't show him any mercy.
The judge sentences Christian to life in prison, and Christian must serve 25 years of his sentence before he's eligible for parole.
While the conviction brings, I'm sure, a little bit of closure for Vanessa's family, there's nothing that will bring their daughter back.
She was doing everything right. She just fell in love with the wrong person who, for the majority of their relationship, didn't even hint at any signs of violence. So she had no way of knowing that he was going to go from 0 to 100.
He was not ready to just let her go. And when she was able to stand in her truth and be honest about where she was emotionally, he could not take that rejection.
This case is truly a tragedy. You have a young woman who was a hard worker. People describe her as an amazing person, an awesome friend. She was destined to do some awesome things, but now that won't ever happen.
On the morning of December 14th, still 1991, students began arriving at Eisenhower High School in Yakima, Washington, expecting an ordinary Saturday. The school was hosting activities that drew teenagers onto campus before sunrise. Instead of a routine weekend gathering, the community would soon confront a homicide that would remain unresolved for more than 3 decades and eventually become one of Washington State's most significant cold case investigations. Sarah Yarborough was a 16-year-old high school student whose family, friends, and teachers remembered her as academically motivated, active in school, and looking toward the future. Like many teenagers, her daily routine revolved around school, extracurricular activities, family, and friends. Nothing in the publicly documented records suggested that she was connected to organized crime or engaged in conduct that would have anticipated the violence that occurred that December morning. According to court records and investigative reports made public over the years, Sarah arrived at Eisenhower High School early that morning to participate in school-related activities. Before the campus became fully occupied, she was attacked in an area near the school's athletic facilities. Emergency responders were summoned after she was discovered. Despite their efforts, she died from injuries sustained during the assault. The homicide immediately became one of the most serious criminal investigations ever undertaken by the Yakima Police Department. The crime scene presented investigators with both opportunities and challenges. Detectives secured the area, documented physical evidence, photographed the scene, interviewed potential witnesses, and collected biological material that they believed could prove significant. Although DNA profiling was still developing as a forensic discipline in the early 1990s, investigators recognized the importance of preserving every available piece of evidence according to accepted procedures. The decisions made during those first hours would later prove essential as forensic science advanced over the following decades. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the school campus. Detectives sought to reconstruct Sarah's movements before the attack, determine who had access to the area, and identify anyone who might have observed suspicious activity. Hundreds of interviews were conducted with classmates, school employees, nearby residents, and individuals connected to school events occurring that weekend. Law enforcement examined tips from the public, compared known offenders, and evaluated individuals who might have had the opportunity to commit the crime. Because the homicide occurred on school property, it generated immediate concern throughout Yakima. Parents questioned whether students remained safe. School administrators cooperated closely with investigators while attempting to reassure families during an exceptionally difficult period. Media coverage spread rapidly across Washington state, bringing widespread attention to the investigation and encouraging members of the public to provide information that might assist detectives. During the initial investigation, forensic scientists processed the biological evidence recovered from the crime scene using the best available laboratory techniques of the period. Although those methods were far less advanced than modern DNA analysis, investigators understood that preserving biological evidence could allow future testing as technology improved. The evidence was carefully maintained, reflecting a growing recognition among homicide investigators that scientific advances might someday provide answers unavailable at the time. Throughout the 1990s, investigators continued pursuing leads. They reviewed witness statements, analyzed physical evidence, and periodically reassessed persons of interest as new information emerged. Despite extensive investigative work, no suspect was identified through the available evidence. As months became years, the homicide joined the growing number of cases classified as cold cases investigations, in which all immediate leads had been exhausted without identifying the person responsible. Even after the investigation became inactive, it was never formally abandoned. Detectives periodically reopened the file to evaluate advances in forensic science and review new information submitted by the public. Evidence remained securely preserved, investigative reports were maintained, and each new technological development prompted renewed consideration of whether additional testing might produce meaningful results. The years that followed witnessed extraordinary changes in forensic biology. DNA profiling became increasingly sophisticated, allowing scientists to recover useful genetic information from biological samples that earlier laboratories had been unable to analyze successfully. These scientific developments transformed homicide investigation throughout the United States, particularly in cases where evidence had been carefully preserved. As new methods emerged, the Sarah Yarborough investigation remained among the cases that investigators hoped might eventually benefit from future forensic advances. For Sarah's family, however, the passage of time carried a different meaning. Public records and family statements describe decades spent waiting for answers that never seemed to arrive. Anniversaries, birthdays, and holidays passed while the investigation remained unresolved. Although law enforcement continued reviewing the case, the absence of an identified suspect meant that the legal process could not move forward. Like many families affected by long-term cold cases, they lived with uncertainty while continuing to hope that advances in science or new information might one day provide the breakthrough investigators had sought since December 1991. As the investigation entered the 21st century, forensic science was changing in ways few investigators could have imagined when the evidence was first collected. Improvements in DNA technology, expanding national databases, and eventually the emergence of investigative genetic genealogy created entirely new opportunities to examine preserved evidence. Those developments would ultimately reshape one of Washington State's oldest unsolved homicide investigations, demonstrating how scientific progress can influence criminal investigations decades after the original crime occurred. The foundation for those future developments, however, had been established during the careful investigative work performed in the hours immediately following the murder, when detectives and forensic specialists preserved evidence with the expectation that science might someday reveal what contemporary technology could not. Following the homicide of Sarah Yarborough on December 14, 1991, investigators from the Yakima Police Department began what would become one of the longest-running homicide investigations in Washington state. The immediate priority was to preserve every available piece of evidence, identify potential witnesses, and establish a reliable timeline of events leading up to the attack. Detectives recognized from the outset that crimes committed in public locations often require extensive investigative work because physical evidence, witness observations, and environmental conditions must all be carefully evaluated before reliable conclusions can be drawn. The investigation began with a comprehensive examination of the crime scene. Crime scene technicians photographed the area, documented the location of physical evidence, prepared detailed diagrams, and collected biological material that laboratory personnel believed might later assist forensic analysis. Clothing, trace evidence, and other items recovered during the investigation were preserved under established chain of custody procedures. At the time, DNA profiling was still developing as an investigative technique, but investigators understood that biological evidence could become increasingly valuable as forensic science advanced. Detectives also sought to reconstruct Sarah Yarborough's movements during the hours preceding the attack. Investigators interviewed family members, classmates, school personnel, and individuals expected to be present on campus that Saturday morning. These interviews helped establish a timeline identifying when Sarah arrived at Eisenhower High School and the approximate period during which the assault occurred. Although numerous individuals had legitimate reasons to be near the campus, investigators found no immediate evidence identifying the person responsible. Because the homicide occurred on school property, the investigation generated significant public concern. Parents questioned school safety, students were interviewed regarding anything unusual they might have observed, and local media provided extensive coverage encouraging anyone with relevant information to contact investigators. Hundreds of tips were received during the weeks following the murder. Detectives evaluated each lead individually, recognizing that even seemingly minor observations might contribute to understanding the circumstances surrounding the crime. Investigators also examined whether the homicide might be connected to other violent offenses reported within the region. Detectives routinely compare unsolved homicides with similar cases to determine whether patterns involving location, victim characteristics, offender behavior, or forensic evidence suggest a common offender. According to publicly available investigative information, no conclusive connection to another homicide investigation was established during the initial inquiry. Throughout 1992 and the years that followed, forensic laboratories continued analyzing the evidence collected from the scene. As DNA technology gradually improved, preserved biological material was re-examined using newer analytical methods. Each technological advancement offered investigators another opportunity to determine whether additional genetic information could be obtained from evidence originally collected in 1991. This process reflected a growing practice among law enforcement agencies of revisiting unsolved homicide investigations whenever significant scientific developments became available. The investigation also illustrates the importance of evidence preservation over extended periods. Biological evidence collected during homicide investigations must be stored under carefully controlled conditions to prevent contamination or degradation. Evidence custodians maintained detailed records documenting every transfer, examination, and storage location associated with the preserved materials. These administrative procedures ensured that later forensic testing could be conducted while maintaining the evidentiary integrity required for potential criminal prosecution. As months became years, detectives periodically reviewed the investigative file. Cold case investigations differ from newly reported crimes because they often rely upon systematic reassessment rather than continuous field investigation. Investigators revisited witness statements, compared emerging forensic results with earlier findings, reviewed persons of interest identified during previous investigative phases, and evaluated newly received public information. Although these reviews did not immediately identify a suspect, they ensured that the investigation remained active whenever new opportunities arose. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, forensic DNA analysis became increasingly sophisticated. Improvements in laboratory methods allowed scientists to obtain reliable genetic profiles from biological samples that earlier technologies had been unable to analyze successfully. Across the United States, numerous cold case investigations benefited from these scientific developments. Law enforcement agencies began recognizing that evidence preserved decades earlier might now produce investigative information unavailable during the original investigation. The Sarah Yarborough investigation remained among those periodically reassessed as forensic capabilities evolved. Detectives continued working with forensic scientists to determine whether preserved biological evidence could support additional testing. While progress was gradual, each laboratory advance increased the possibility that the investigation might eventually benefit from scientific methods unavailable in 1991. The case also highlighted the emotional impact of prolonged uncertainty on victims' families. Public statements made over the years reflected the family's continuing hope that advances in forensic science would eventually identify the person responsible. At the same time, investigators maintained communication with the family regarding significant developments while protecting the integrity of the ongoing investigation. Such communication represents an important aspect of long-term homicide investigations, balancing transparency with the need to preserve confidential investigative information. By the beginning of the 21st century, the Sarah Yarborough investigation had become one of Washington's most significant unresolved homicide cases. The preserved evidence remained intact, investigative records continued to be maintained, and periodic reviews ensured that new scientific developments could be incorporated into the case. Although no suspect had yet been identified, the investigation had established a strong evidentiary foundation that would later prove critical as forensic science entered a new era marked by increasingly powerful DNA analysis and, eventually, investigative genetic genealogy. Those advances would fundamentally change the direction of the investigation and create opportunities that investigators in 1991 could not have anticipated. Following the homicide of Sarah Yarborough on December 14, 1991, investigators from the Yakima Police Department began what would become one of the longest-running homicide investigations in Washington state. The immediate priority was to preserve every available piece of evidence, identify potential witnesses, and establish a reliable timeline of events leading up to the attack. Detectives recognized from the outset that crimes committed in public locations often require extensive investigative work because physical evidence, witness observations, and environmental conditions must all be carefully evaluated before reliable conclusions can be drawn. The investigation began with a comprehensive examination of the crime scene. Crime scene technicians photographed the area, documented the location of physical evidence, prepared detailed diagrams, and collected biological material that laboratory personnel believed might later assist forensic analysis. Clothing, trace evidence, and other items recovered during the investigation were preserved under established chain of custody procedures. At the time, DNA profiling was still developing as an investigative technique, but investigators understood that biological evidence could become increasingly valuable as forensic science advanced. Detectives also sought to reconstruct Sarah Yarborough's movements during the hours preceding the attack. Investigators interviewed family members, classmates, school personnel, and individuals expected to be present on campus that Saturday morning. These interviews helped establish a timeline identifying when Sarah arrived at Eisenhower High School and the approximate period during which the assault occurred. Although numerous individuals had legitimate reasons to be near the campus, investigators found no immediate evidence identifying the person responsible. Because the homicide occurred on school property, the investigation generated significant public concern. Parents questioned school safety, students were interviewed regarding anything unusual they might have observed, and local media provided extensive coverage encouraging anyone with relevant information to contact investigators. Hundreds of tips were received during the weeks following the murder. Detectives evaluated each lead individually, recognizing that even seemingly minor observations might contribute to understanding the circumstances surrounding the crime. Investigators also examined whether the homicide might be connected to other violent offenses reported within the region. Detectives routinely compare unsolved homicides with similar cases to determine whether patterns involving location, victim characteristics, offender behavior, or forensic evidence suggest a common offender. According to publicly available investigative information, no conclusive connection to another homicide investigation was established during the initial inquiry. Throughout 1992 and the years that followed, forensic laboratories continued analyzing the evidence collected from the scene. As DNA technology gradually improved, preserved biological material was re-examined using newer analytical methods. Each technological advancement offered investigators another opportunity to determine whether additional genetic information could be obtained from evidence originally collected in 1991. This process reflected a growing practice among law enforcement agencies of revisiting unsolved homicide investigations whenever significant scientific developments became available. The investigation also illustrates the importance of evidence preservation over extended periods. Biological evidence collected during homicide investigations must be stored under carefully controlled conditions to prevent contamination or degradation. Evidence custodians maintained detailed records documenting every transfer, examination, and storage location associated with the preserved materials. These administrative procedures ensured that later forensic testing could be conducted while maintaining the evidentiary integrity required for potential criminal prosecution. As months became years, detectives periodically reviewed the investigative file. Cold case investigations differ from newly reported crimes because they often rely upon systematic reassessment rather than continuous field investigation. Investigators revisited witness statements, compared emerging forensic results with earlier findings, reviewed persons of interest identified during previous investigative phases, and evaluated newly received public information. Although these reviews did not immediately identify a suspect, they ensured that the investigation remained active whenever new opportunities arose. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, forensic DNA analysis became increasingly sophisticated. Improvements in laboratory methods allowed scientists to obtain reliable genetic profiles from biological samples that earlier technologies had been unable to analyze successfully. Across the United States, numerous cold case investigations benefited from these scientific developments. Law enforcement agencies began recognizing that evidence preserved decades earlier might now produce investigative information unavailable during the original investigation. The Sarah Yarborough investigation remained among those periodically reassessed as forensic capabilities evolved. Detectives continued working with forensic scientists to determine whether preserved biological evidence could support additional testing. While progress was gradual, each laboratory advance increased the possibility that the investigation might eventually benefit from scientific methods unavailable in 1991. The case also highlighted the emotional impact of prolonged uncertainty on victims' families. Public statements made over the years reflected the family's continuing hope that advances in forensic science would eventually identify the person responsible. At the same time, investigators maintained communication with the family regarding significant developments while protecting the integrity of the ongoing investigation. Such communication represents an important aspect of long-term homicide investigations, balancing transparency with the need to preserve confidential investigative information. By the beginning of the 21st century, the Sarah Yarborough investigation had become one of Washington's most significant unresolved homicide cases. The preserved evidence remained intact, investigative records continued to be maintained, and periodic reviews ensured that new scientific developments could be incorporated into the case. Although no suspect had yet been identified, the investigation had established a strong evidentiary foundation that would later prove critical as forensic science entered a new era marked by increasingly powerful DNA analysis and, eventually, investigative genetic genealogy. Those advances would fundamentally change the direction of the investigation and create opportunities that investigators in 1991 could not have anticipated. As the years passed without an arrest, the murder of Sarah Yarborough increasingly came to be classified as a cold case, a term used in law enforcement to describe investigations in which all immediately available leads have been exhausted. But the case remains open and subject to future review. Contrary to popular perception, cold cases are not abandoned investigations. Instead, they are maintained within investigative files, with evidence preserved and periodically reassessed as new information or improved forensic techniques become available. The Sarah Yarborough investigation followed this pattern for more than 2 decades. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, detectives continued evaluating new information received from members of the public. High-profile, unsolved homicides often generate recurring tips over many years. Some originate from individuals recalling observations they previously considered unimportant, while others involve speculation or information that investigators ultimately determine cannot be corroborated. Every credible lead required assessment through established investigative procedures, including interviews, record reviews, and comparison with the known evidence. Although numerous tips were examined, none produced sufficient evidence to identify the offender during this period. At the same time, forensic laboratories continued refining DNA analysis. During the years immediately following the homicide, the available laboratory methods could develop only limited genetic information from some biological samples. As molecular biology advanced, scientists introduced more sensitive extraction procedures, improved amplification methods, and increasingly reliable statistical interpretation. These developments gradually expanded the investigative value of evidence that had been collected years earlier. The preserved biological evidence from the Sarah Yarborough investigation therefore remained central to the case. Detectives understood that even if existing laboratory techniques did not immediately identify a suspect, future advances might permit additional analysis. This recognition influenced evidence retention practices throughout many law enforcement agencies in the United States, encouraging long-term preservation of biological material recovered during serious violent crimes. The investigation also reflects the changing organizational approach to cold cases during the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Many police departments began establishing specialized investigators or cold case review processes dedicated to reassessing unsolved homicides. Rather than relying solely on the detectives originally assigned to a case, agencies increasingly recognized the value of fresh review by experienced investigators who could evaluate historical evidence objectively and incorporate scientific developments unavailable during earlier investigations. Within the Yakima Police Department, investigators periodically revisited the Sarah Yarborough case as forensic capabilities improved. Existing evidence was reviewed, laboratory testing was reconsidered, and investigative files were examined for opportunities created by advances in science or information technology. The case remained active within the department despite the absence of an identified suspect. Another important development during this period involved the expansion of computerized criminal justice databases. Law enforcement agencies gained improved access to fingerprint systems, criminal history records, DNA databases, and digital investigative records. These resources allowed detectives to compare evidence more efficiently than had been possible during the early 1990s. Although routine database comparisons did not immediately resolve the Sarah Yarborough investigation, they formed part of the continuing effort to identify potential investigative leads. As DNA technology matured, investigators increasingly recognized its potential in resolving historical homicide investigations. Cases involving preserved biological evidence became priorities for renewed forensic review because scientific advances offered opportunities unavailable when the crimes originally occurred. Across the United States, several previously unsolved murders were resolved through improved DNA testing, reinforcing confidence that carefully preserved evidence could retain significant investigative value even after many years. The Sarah Yarborough investigation remained among those awaiting further scientific opportunity. Detectives continued working closely with forensic scientists to determine whether newer laboratory methods might extract additional information from the preserved evidence. Such reassessment required balancing scientific possibility with the need to preserve evidence for any future judicial proceedings. Every laboratory examination was carefully documented to maintain evidentiary integrity. During these years, the investigation also highlighted the importance of collaboration between investigators and prosecutors, even when scientific advances generated new information. Prosecutors evaluated whether the available evidence satisfied legal standards necessary to support criminal charges. Detectives therefore continued seeking corroborating evidence through interviews, historical records, and investigative review rather than relying upon any single source of information. Public interest in the case remained steady over the decades. Local media periodically reported on anniversaries of the homicide, appeals for information, and developments in forensic science that might eventually assist investigators. These reports often encouraged individuals with relevant information to contact law enforcement, reflecting the understanding that long unsolved cases can sometimes benefit from renewed public attention. While no immediate breakthrough resulted from these appeals, they reinforced the continuing commitment of investigators to resolving the case. The prolonged investigation also illustrates the broader challenges associated with historical homicide cases. Witness memories may fade over time, some witnesses become unavailable, physical environments change, and investigative personnel inevitably retire or transfer to other assignments. Maintaining comprehensive documentation, therefore, becomes essential. In the Sarah Yarborough investigation, detailed reports, evidence inventories, laboratory records, and interview summaries preserved institutional knowledge that later investigators could rely upon when reviewing the case years after the original crime. By the early 2010s, advances in forensic DNA analysis had transformed criminal investigation throughout North America. Laboratories could recover increasingly informative genetic profiles from biological samples once considered unsuitable for analysis. At the same time, investigators began recognizing the potential of an emerging investigative approach that combined forensic genetics with traditional genealogical research. Known as investigative genetic genealogy, the methodology had not yet become widely used, but early developments suggested that it might eventually assist in identifying unknown offenders whose DNA could not be matched through conventional law enforcement databases. For the Sarah Yarborough investigation, these scientific developments represented a significant turning point. Although the case remained officially unsolved, the preserved evidence now possessed investigative potential far beyond what had been possible in 1991. Detectives continued monitoring advances in forensic science while preserving the evidence and documentation that had sustained the investigation for more than 2 decades. The foundation established during the original investigation remained intact, positioning the case to benefit from the next major evolution in forensic identification methods. That evolution would emerge through the application of investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that would fundamentally reshape the future of cold case investigations across the United States. By the middle of the 2010s, forensic science had entered a new phase that fundamentally changed the investigation of many cold cases throughout the United States. Traditional DNA profiling had already become an essential component of homicide investigations, allowing forensic laboratories to compare biological evidence recovered from crime scenes with profiles contained in criminal justice databases. However, many investigations, including the murder of Sarah Yarborough, remained unresolved because the unknown DNA profile recovered from the crime scene did not match anyone whose genetic information had been entered into those databases. Investigators therefore faced an important limitation. They possessed valuable forensic evidence, but lacked a method for identifying the individual to whom it belonged. The emergence of investigative genetic genealogy provided a potential solution to this problem. Unlike conventional forensic DNA analysis, which seeks exact matches within law enforcement databases, investigative genetic genealogy compares an unknown DNA profile with genetic information voluntarily submitted by individuals researching family history through participating genealogy services. The objective is not to identify the unknown individual directly, but to identify distant biological relatives whose shared genetic material can assist researchers in reconstructing extended family trees. This methodology combines laboratory science with historical research. After a suitable forensic DNA profile is developed, genealogists analyze potential biological relationships suggested by participating databases. They then examine public records, including birth certificates, marriage records, census documents, obituary notices, military records, newspaper archives, cemetery information, and other historical sources to construct family histories spanning multiple generations. By identifying where different family branches intersect, investigators can gradually narrow the number of individuals who could plausibly correspond to the unknown DNA profile. Importantly, investigative genetic genealogy does not itself establish criminal responsibility. Instead, it generates investigative leads requiring independent verification through traditional police work and confirmatory forensic testing. Detectives continue evaluating timelines, geographic connections, witness statements, documentary evidence, and other investigative information before focusing on any individual identified through genealogical analysis. If investigators determine that a particular person warrants further investigation, they obtain a legally authorized reference DNA sample for direct comparison with the crime scene evidence. Only after laboratory scientists confirm that comparison can prosecutors evaluate whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed with criminal charges. As this methodology began demonstrating success in several high-profile investigations across the United States, law enforcement agencies started reviewing older homicide cases to determine whether preserved biological evidence met the scientific requirements for genealogical analysis. Cases involving well-preserved DNA evidence, but no identified suspect, became particularly suitable candidates. The Sarah Yarborough investigation met many of these criteria because investigators had carefully preserved biological evidence collected during the original 1991 investigation. The Yakima Police Department, working with forensic specialists and prosecutors, periodically reviewed the case to determine whether advances in DNA technology justified additional analysis. Such decisions required careful scientific evaluation. Not every biological sample contains sufficient genetic material for genealogy-based investigation, and laboratories must ensure that any testing preserves evidence for potential future judicial proceedings. As laboratory methods continued improving, investigators concluded that the preserved evidence warranted renewed examination using contemporary forensic techniques. The development of a suitable forensic DNA profile represented only one stage of a much larger investigative effort. Genealogical research required months of detailed analysis conducted by specialists familiar with both genetics and historical documentation. Researchers evaluated numerous family relationships, verified documentary records, eliminated investigative possibilities inconsistent with known evidence, and gradually reduced the number of individuals requiring further examination. Throughout this process, detectives remained responsible for assessing whether each investigative lead aligned with the established facts documented during more than 2 decades of investigative work. The Sarah Yarborough investigation also illustrates the importance of maintaining objectivity during complex forensic inquiries. Investigators avoided relying solely upon genealogical findings. Every potential lead required independent corroboration through conventional investigative techniques. Detectives examined residential histories, employment records, geographic proximity, age, and other factual information to determine whether any identified individual could reasonably be connected to the evidence preserved from 1991. This disciplined approach reflected long-standing investigative principles designed to ensure that scientific developments complement rather than replace traditional criminal investigation. At the same time, legal and ethical discussions surrounding investigative genetic genealogy were expanding. Because genealogy databases consist largely of DNA voluntarily submitted for ancestry research, policymakers, legal scholars, forensic organizations, and database operators began considering issues relating to privacy, informed consent, law enforcement access, and procedural safeguards. Several genealogy services introduced policies allowing participants to decide whether their genetic information could be used to assist investigations involving serious violent crimes. These policy developments reflected broader efforts to balance investigative benefits with privacy considerations. For the Sarah Yarborough investigation, however, the primary focus remained scientific and evidentiary. Detectives continued emphasizing that any individual identified through genealogy would still require direct forensic confirmation before criminal charges could be considered. Investigative genetic genealogy functioned as an investigative roadmap rather than courtroom evidence. The ultimate evidentiary standard remained the same: scientifically validated DNA comparison supported by corroborating investigative findings and evaluated through established judicial procedures. As genealogical research progressed, investigators gradually identified increasingly specific investigative possibilities. Each stage of the analysis narrowed the pool of individuals potentially associated with the unknown DNA profile. Detectives then compared those possibilities with information already contained within decades of investigative records, including witness interviews, geographic information, historical employment records, and other documented facts collected throughout the investigation. The convergence of genealogical findings with traditional investigative evidence represented a significant development after many years without meaningful progress. The case illustrates how scientific innovation depends upon earlier investigative work. The success of genealogical analysis was possible because investigators in 1991 had preserved biological evidence according to accepted forensic standards, maintained detailed documentation, and protected the integrity of the evidence through decades of secure storage. Without those foundational investigative practices, later scientific advances could not have been applied effectively. By the late 2010s, the Sarah Yarborough investigation had entered a fundamentally different phase. After more than 25 years without identifying a suspect, advances in forensic genetics and genealogy had created investigative opportunities that did not exist when the homicide occurred. Detectives, forensic scientists, genealogists, prosecutors, and laboratory specialists now worked collaboratively to evaluate emerging evidence while maintaining rigorous scientific and legal standards. Although investigators had not yet publicly identified a suspect, the investigation had moved beyond the limitations that defined earlier decades, demonstrating how evolving forensic science could reopen even the oldest homicide investigations when evidence had been carefully preserved and systematically re-examined. The renewed examination of the Sarah Yarborough homicide marked a turning point in an investigation that had remained unresolved for decades. By the late 2010s, investigators possessed scientific tools that had not existed when the crime occurred in December 1991. The biological evidence collected during the original investigation had been preserved under conditions that allowed forensic scientists to apply modern analytical methods, creating an opportunity to generate investigative leads unavailable to earlier detectives. One of the most significant developments involved the application of investigative genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional DNA database searches, which depend on an exact match between crime scene evidence and a profile already contained in a law enforcement database, investigative genetic genealogy seeks biological relatives of the unknown individual through genealogy databases whose participants have chosen to allow such law enforcement use. This process does not identify a suspect directly. Instead, it identifies distant relatives whose family histories can be reconstructed through historical records. Genealogists working with investigators examined publicly available documents such as census records, birth and death certificates, marriage records, obituary notices, property records, military records, and newspaper archives. These historical sources allowed researchers to build extensive family trees spanning multiple generations. As branches of those family trees were verified and expanded, investigators gradually narrowed the number of individuals who could reasonably correspond to the unknown DNA profile recovered from the crime scene. Throughout this process, detectives continued relying on conventional investigative methods. Genealogical findings alone were not sufficient to support criminal charges. Investigators compared potential candidates against the established facts of the case, including age, geographic location, employment history, and other documented information contained within the investigative file. Every potential lead required careful evaluation before additional investigative steps were taken. The Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrates how modern cold case investigations combine scientific innovation with traditional detective work. Advances in forensic biology created new opportunities, but experienced investigators remained responsible for interpreting those findings within the broader context of the evidence collected since 1991. Historical reports prepared during the original investigation continued serving as an important reference point, allowing detectives to compare new information with witness interviews, physical evidence, and investigative observations recorded decades earlier. As the genealogical research progressed, investigators eventually focused on Gary Charles Hartman as a person requiring further investigation. According to publicly reported court records, this development resulted from the combination of genealogical analysis and traditional investigative review, rather than from a single piece of evidence alone. The detectives then sought to determine whether additional forensic testing could either eliminate or confirm him as the source of the biological evidence preserved from the crime scene. To accomplish this, investigators obtained a legally authorized reference DNA sample for comparison with the crime scene evidence. Direct forensic comparison differs fundamentally from genealogical analysis. While genealogy identifies possible biological relationships, confirmatory DNA testing determines whether a person's genetic profile is consistent with the forensic evidence recovered during the original investigation. Accredited forensic laboratories conducted this comparison using established scientific procedures designed to ensure reliability and maintain evidentiary integrity. According to prosecutors and court filings, the laboratory comparison indicated that the reference DNA sample was consistent with the biological evidence recovered during the investigation. This represented a significant milestone because it provided a direct forensic connection between the preserved crime scene evidence and the individual investigators had identified through genealogy-assisted investigative work. Prosecutors then evaluated the available evidence to determine whether the case met the legal standards required for criminal charges. The investigation illustrates the distinction between investigative leads and admissible courtroom evidence. Investigative genetic genealogy helped detectives identify an individual for further investigation, but the prosecution relied upon direct forensic DNA analysis and additional admissible evidence presented through the judicial process. This distinction has become a central principle governing the use of investigative genetic genealogy in criminal investigations across the United States. The announcement of an arrest after nearly 3 decades attracted significant public attention. For many residents of Yakima, the homicide had remained one of the community's most enduring unsolved crimes. News that advances in forensic science had allowed investigators to identify a suspect generated renewed public interest in the investigation and in the broader potential of DNA technology to assist cold case investigations nationwide. For investigators who had worked on the case over many years, the arrest represented the culmination of decades of evidence preservation, investigative review, and scientific advancement. Numerous detectives, forensic scientists, evidence custodians, prosecutors, and support personnel had contributed to the investigation since 1991. Although many of the original investigators had retired or moved to other assignments, the continuity of documentation and evidence management allowed subsequent investigative teams to continue building upon their work. The case also highlighted the importance of long-term institutional commitment. Cold case investigations frequently require sustained organizational support extending across multiple decades. Evidence must be preserved, investigative files maintained, and scientific developments monitored so that emerging technologies can be applied when appropriate. The Sarah Yarborough investigation illustrates how these long-term administrative responsibilities can become decisive factors in eventually identifying a suspect. At the same time, investigators emphasized that the arrest did not conclude the criminal justice process. Under the legal system, every defendant is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. Following the filing of criminal charges, the case proceeded through judicial proceedings in which prosecutors were required to present admissible evidence, and the defense was afforded the opportunity to challenge that evidence through established legal procedures. Scientific findings, therefore, became one component of a broader judicial process governed by constitutional protections and rules of evidence. The developments in the Sarah Yarborough investigation also contributed to continuing discussions about the future of cold case investigations. Law enforcement agencies across North America increasingly reviewed unsolved homicide cases to determine whether preserved biological evidence might benefit from modern forensic testing or investigative genetic genealogy. While investigators recognized that not every cold case would contain suitable evidence, the successful identification of a suspect in this investigation demonstrated the potential value of combining meticulous evidence preservation with evolving scientific methods. It also reinforced a principle shared throughout forensic science. Evidence collected carefully today may reveal information many years later that could not have been obtained when the investigation first began. Following the identification of Gary Charles Hartman through the combination of investigative genetic genealogy and traditional investigative methods, the Sarah Yarborough investigation entered a new phase focused on forensic confirmation, legal review, and preparation for prosecution. After nearly 3 decades as an unresolved homicide, the investigation shifted from identifying a potential suspect to determining whether the available evidence satisfied the legal standards required to proceed through the criminal justice system. A central element of this transition involved confirmatory DNA analysis. investigative genetic genealogy had generated an investigative led by identifying a possible biological relationship between the unknown DNA profile recovered from the crime, seen in individuals appearing in genealogy databases. However, genealogy itself does not establish identity with forensic certainty. Investigators therefore obtained a reference DNA sample from Gary Charles Hartman through lawful investigative procedures. Accredited forensic laboratories then conducted a direct comparison between that reference sample and the biological evidence preserved from the original investigation. Direct forensic comparison differs fundamentally from genealogical analysis. While genealogy narrows the field of possible individuals by identifying family relationships, direct DNA comparison evaluates whether two specific genetic profiles are consistent with originating from the same individual. Laboratory scientists apply validated analytical procedures, quality control measures, and statistical interpretation to ensure that the comparison satisfies accepted scientific standards. According to publicly available court records, this testing supported investigators' conclusion that Hartman could be linked to the biological evidence collected during the 1991 investigation. Once laboratory analysis had been completed, detectives assembled the investigative record for prosecutorial review. Prosecutors examined not only the forensic evidence, but also the broader investigative file accumulated over decades. This included crime scene documentation, witness interviews, historical reports, laboratory findings, evidence inventories, and the investigative steps leading from genealogical research to confirmatory DNA testing. Prosecutors are responsible for determining whether the available evidence is sufficient to support criminal charges under applicable legal standards. The Sarah Yarborough investigation illustrates the distinction between investigative conclusions and judicial findings. Detectives may identify a suspect based on evidence developed during an investigation, but criminal responsibility is determined only through judicial proceedings conducted according to established legal procedures. Accordingly, after charges were filed, the case entered the court system, where prosecutors presented evidence and the defense was afforded the opportunity to challenge that evidence before an impartial tribunal. The case also demonstrated the importance of maintaining comprehensive chain of custody documentation. Because the biological evidence had been preserved for nearly 30 years, investigators needed to establish that every transfer, storage location, laboratory examination, and handling procedure had been properly documented. Chain of custody provides assurance that evidence presented during judicial proceedings is the same evidence originally collected during the investigation and has not been altered or contaminated. Maintaining such documentation over extended periods represents one of the most demanding aspects of long-term homicide investigations. During pretrial proceedings, the parties addressed numerous legal issues commonly associated with complex forensic cases. Courts routinely consider questions concerning the admissibility of scientific evidence, expert testimony, procedural compliance, and evidentiary reliability. These proceedings allow judges to determine whether proposed evidence satisfies applicable legal standards before it is presented during trial. Such judicial review forms an essential safeguard within criminal justice systems and is particularly significant when investigations involve advanced forensic methodologies. The investigation further illustrates how modern forensic science depends upon interdisciplinary collaboration. Detectives coordinated investigative activities, forensic biologists conducted laboratory analysis, genealogists assisted with family history research, evidence custodians preserved physical materials, prosecutors evaluated legal sufficiency, and expert witnesses prepared to explain scientific findings within judicial proceedings. Each discipline contributed specialized knowledge while operating within a coordinated investigative framework. Public attention surrounding the case also reflected broader interest in the growing use of investigative genetic genealogy. Following several successful cold case investigations in the United States, members of the public became increasingly aware of genealogy-assisted investigative techniques. At the same time, legal scholars, policymakers, and forensic organizations continued discussing ethical considerations, including privacy protections, informed consent, database participation, and appropriate oversight governing law enforcement use of genealogical information. The Sarah Yarborough investigation became part of these broader discussions because it demonstrated both the investigative potential and the procedural safeguards associated with genealogy-assisted investigations. Law enforcement agencies emphasized that genealogical research functions as an investigative tool rather than courtroom proof. Every genealogical lead requires independent forensic confirmation and must ultimately satisfy the same legal standards applicable to all criminal prosecutions. The investigation likewise highlighted the continuing value of evidence collected during the earliest stages of a homicide inquiry. Crime scene investigators working in December 1991 documented the scene, collected biological evidence, and preserved physical materials according to accepted procedures despite having no knowledge of future scientific developments. Their work created the evidentiary foundation upon which later forensic analysis depended. This principle remains central to homicide investigation today. Evidence collected carefully during the initial response may acquire increased investigative significance as technology advances. For law enforcement agencies throughout North America, the case reinforced the importance of periodically reviewing unresolved homicide investigations. Advances in forensic biology, DNA sequencing, computational analysis, and genealogical research continue expanding investigative possibilities for cases involving preserved biological evidence. Consequently, many agencies have established specialized cold case review programs designed to identify investigations that may benefit from contemporary scientific methods. Professional organizations have similarly incorporated lessons from investigations such as the Sarah Yarborough case into training programs for detectives, forensic scientists, and prosecutors. Educational materials emphasize comprehensive documentation, evidence preservation, interdisciplinary communication, objective investigative review, and careful integration of scientific advances into established investigative practice. These principles seek to ensure that future cold case investigations can benefit from continuing developments in forensic science while maintaining rigorous legal and scientific standards. By the time the criminal proceedings advanced, the Sarah Yarborough investigation had evolved from a traditional cold case into an important example of modern forensic investigation. The combination of preserved biological evidence, advancing DNA technology, investigative genetic genealogy, conventional detective work, laboratory confirmation, and judicial oversight demonstrated how multiple disciplines can contribute to resolving historical homicide investigations. The case also underscored a broader lesson for criminal justice professionals. Technological innovation is most effective when supported by careful evidence preservation, thorough documentation, and sustained institutional commitment extending across decades. As the prosecution of Gary Charles Hartman moved through the Washington court system, the Sarah Yarborough investigation became an important example of how modern forensic science intersects with long-established legal principles. Although public attention focused largely on the role of DNA technology and investigative genetic genealogy, the judicial process required prosecutors to establish their case using admissible evidence presented according to the rules governing criminal trials. Every stage of the proceedings reflected the distinction between investigative techniques used to identify a suspect and the evidence ultimately evaluated by the court. One of the principal components of the prosecution involved expert testimony explaining the scientific methods used during the investigation. Forensic scientists described how biological evidence recovered during the original 1991 investigation had been preserved, analyzed, and compared with reference samples using validated laboratory procedures. Expert witnesses also explained the quality control systems employed by accredited forensic laboratories, including contamination prevention, documentation requirements, technical review, and statistical interpretation. These procedures are designed to ensure that scientific conclusions presented in court are reliable, reproducible, and supported by accepted forensic standards. Investigative genetic genealogy, while important during the investigative phase, occupied a different role within the judicial proceedings. Genealogy assisted detectives by identifying an investigative lead through analysis of biological relationships found in participating genealogy databases. Once that lead had been developed, investigators sought direct forensic confirmation through standard DNA comparison techniques. Consequently, prosecutors relied primarily on the confirmatory forensic analysis rather than genealogy itself when presenting scientific evidence during court proceedings. This distinction has become a defining feature of many genealogy-assisted investigations. The legal proceedings also highlighted the importance of chain of custody documentation. Because the evidence had remained in official custody for approximately 3 decades, prosecutors demonstrated that every transfer, examination, storage location, and laboratory analysis had been documented according to established procedures. Chain of custody helps ensure that evidence introduced during trial is the same material originally collected during the investigation, and that its integrity has been maintained throughout the investigative process. Long-term evidence management therefore became a significant aspect of the prosecution. Another important issue concerned the preservation of historical investigative records. Detectives working on the case decades after the homicide relied extensively on reports prepared during the original investigation. Crime scene diagrams, witness interviews, laboratory reports, evidence inventories, and investigative summaries allowed subsequent investigators to understand earlier findings and evaluate new scientific information within the broader context of the Butte case. This continuity illustrates why detailed documentation remains essential in major homicide investigations, particularly those that may remain unresolved for extended periods. The Sarah Yarborough investigation also demonstrates the role of multidisciplinary cooperation in contemporary criminal investigations. Detectives coordinated investigative strategy, forensic biologists conducted laboratory analyses, genealogists assisted with historical family research, prosecutors evaluated legal sufficiency, and evidence custodians maintained physical materials collected in 1991. Each discipline contributed specialized expertise while operating within established investigative and legal frameworks. Such collaboration has become increasingly common as scientific methods continue expanding the capabilities available to homicide investigators. Public discussion surrounding the case frequently focused on advances in forensic science. Since the early 1990s, laboratory methods have undergone continuous refinement. Improvements in DNA extraction, amplification, sequencing, contamination control, and statistical analysis have significantly increased the quantity and quality of information obtainable from biological evidence. Cases like the Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrate how evidence collected decades earlier may acquire new investigative value as laboratory science evolves. At the same time, the investigation illustrates the limitations of forensic science. DNA evidence can establish associations between individuals and biological material, but it does not necessarily explain every aspect of an offense. Detectives continued relying upon witness statements, crime scene analysis, historical records, and conventional investigative techniques to understand the broader factual circumstances surrounding the homicide. Scientific evidence, therefore, functioned as one component of a comprehensive investigative process rather than a complete reconstruction of events. The case also contributed to broader professional discussions concerning investigative genetic genealogy, following several successful applications of the methodology in cold case investigations. Law enforcement agencies across the United States evaluated whether similar approaches might assist in resolving other unsolved homicides. Investigators recognize, however, that genealogy is applicable only under specific circumstances. Successful analysis requires preserved biological evidence of sufficient quality, appropriate laboratory capabilities, and informative genetic relationships within participating genealogy databases. Consequently, agencies continue assessing each cold case individually before pursuing genealogy-assisted investigation. Educational institutions have likewise examined the Sarah Yarborough investigation within courses addressing forensic science, criminal investigation, criminology, and legal procedure. The case provides practical examples of evidence preservation, DNA analysis, genealogical research, interdisciplinary collaboration, prosecutorial review, and judicial oversight operating together within a single investigation. Students studying criminal justice frequently analyze such cases to understand how scientific developments influence investigative practice while remaining subject to established legal standards. The investigation further underscores the importance of long-term institutional commitment. Over the course of more than 30 years, numerous detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, laboratory personnel, and support staff contributed to the investigation. Although many individuals originally assigned to the case had retired or transferred before the prosecution commenced, careful documentation and evidence preservation ensured that subsequent investigators could continue the work without compromising investigative integrity. This continuity represents a defining characteristic of successful cold case investigations. Professional organizations have incorporated lessons from the investigation into guidance concerning evidence management and cold case review. Recommendations emphasize preserving biological evidence whenever possible, maintaining comprehensive documentation, conducting periodic case reassessments, and monitoring developments in forensic science that may create new investigative opportunities. These principles seek to maximize the future investigative value of evidence collected during major criminal investigations. Beyond its legal significance, the Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrates how advances in science can influence public policy. Growing recognition of the potential value of genealogy-assisted investigation has encouraged investment in forensic laboratories, specialized cold case units, evidence storage infrastructure, and professional training. Policymakers and criminal justice administrators increasingly recognize that preserving evidence and supporting scientific innovation can create opportunities to resolve investigations previously considered unsolvable. As the judicial proceedings continued, the investigation stood as an example of how modern criminal justice integrates scientific progress with traditional legal safeguards. The evidence collected in 1991 remained central to the prosecution because investigators had preserved it according to professional standards. Advances in forensic biology and investigative genetic genealogy expanded the investigative possibilities available decades later, while the judicial process ensured that scientific findings were evaluated through established evidentiary rules and constitutional protections. Together, these developments illustrate the continuing evolution of homicide investigation and the enduring importance of careful evidence preservation, interdisciplinary cooperation, and objective legal review. As the Sarah Yarborough case progressed through the criminal justice system, it attracted attention well beyond Yakima, Washington. Criminal investigators, forensic scientists, legal scholars, and policymakers viewed the case as part of a broader transformation in the investigation of long unsolved homicides. The successful application of modern forensic science to evidence collected in 1991 illustrated how technological progress could extend the investigative lifespan of preserved biological evidence while reinforcing the importance of traditional investigative practices. One of the principal reasons the case received national attention was the role of evidence preservation. Biological material recovered during the original investigation had remained securely maintained for nearly 3 decades before advances in laboratory science allowed investigators to obtain additional information from it. This outcome reinforced an increasingly accepted principle within forensic investigation. Evidence that cannot answer investigative questions today may become significantly more valuable as scientific capabilities improve. Consequently, many law enforcement agencies have expanded long-term evidence retention policies for serious violent crimes. The investigation also demonstrated the growing importance of specialized cold case units. Many police departments and state investigative agencies now assign experienced detectives to review unresolved homicides using contemporary investigative methods. Rather than repeating earlier investigative work, these units systematically evaluate historical evidence through the lens of modern forensic science, digital record systems, and newly available investigative resources. The Sarah Yarborough investigation exemplifies this approach by showing how historical evidence can be re-examined without disregarding the careful work completed during the original investigation. Advances in forensic DNA analysis formed another significant aspect of the case. Since the early 1990s, laboratories have improved DNA extraction techniques, amplification procedures, sequencing technology, contamination detection, and statistical interpretation. These developments have increased the ability of scientists to generate reliable genetic profiles from biological evidence that might previously have produced limited or inconclusive results. The preserved evidence in the Sarah Yarborough investigation benefited from these advances, illustrating the cumulative effect of decades of scientific research and laboratory innovation. Investigative genetic genealogy represented another important development examined by professionals following the case. This methodology combines forensic genetics with historical genealogical research to generate investigative leads when traditional DNA database searches do not identify a suspect. Genealogists reconstruct extended family relationships using publicly available historical records, while investigators compare those findings with established case evidence. Importantly, genealogy functions as an investigative tool rather than a substitute for direct forensic identification. Confirmatory DNA testing and conventional investigative procedures remain necessary before criminal charges are considered. The case contributed to ongoing discussions regarding professional standards governing genealogy-assisted investigations. Law enforcement organizations, forensic laboratories, and professional associations have increasingly emphasized documentation, transparency, scientific validation, and legal oversight when applying investigative genetic genealogy. These standards seek to ensure that genealogy is employed responsibly, with appropriate consideration for privacy interests, database participation policies, and evidentiary requirements. The judicial proceedings also highlighted the relationship between scientific evidence and legal review. Courts evaluate forensic evidence through established rules governing admissibility, relevance, reliability, and expert testimony. Scientific findings presented during criminal trials are subject to examination by both prosecution and defense, allowing judges and juries to consider their significance within the broader evidentiary record. The Sarah Yarborough case illustrates how modern forensic science operates within, not outside, the existing legal framework governing criminal prosecutions. Another important aspect of the investigation involves interdisciplinary cooperation. Detectives, forensic biologists, genealogists, prosecutors, evidence custodians, crime scene specialists, and laboratory analysts each contributed specialized expertise throughout different phases of the investigation. Effective communication among these disciplines ensured that scientific developments were interpreted accurately, while investigative decisions remained grounded in documented evidence and established legal procedures. Such collaboration has become increasingly essential as forensic investigations grow more technically sophisticated. The case has also become an educational resource within forensic science and criminal justice programs. Universities, police academies, and professional training organizations frequently examine the investigation to illustrate principles of evidence preservation, DNA analysis, investigative methodology, genealogy, assisted investigation, and judicial procedure. Students studying homicide investigation gain practical insight into how scientific advances complement traditional investigative work while reinforcing the continuing importance of documentation, objectivity, and procedural integrity. From an administrative perspective, the investigation demonstrates the value of comprehensive records management. The investigative file accumulated over nearly 30 years included crime scene documentation, laboratory reports, witness interviews, evidence inventories, correspondence, and analytical summaries prepared by multiple generations of investigators. Maintaining these records allowed later detectives to understand earlier investigative decisions and incorporate new forensic findings into an already well-documented case history. Effective documentation therefore served as a bridge connecting the original investigation with subsequent scientific developments. The Sarah Yarborough investigation also illustrates the broader impact of forensic innovation on public policy. As more cold cases have benefited from advances in DNA analysis and investigative genetic genealogy, governments and law enforcement agencies have increased investment in forensic laboratories, evidence storage systems, specialized investigative units, and scientific training. Policymakers increasingly recognize that preserving evidence and supporting forensic research may generate investigative opportunities many years after an offense occurs. Researchers continue studying cases such as this to evaluate the effectiveness of emerging forensic technologies. Ongoing developments in DNA sequencing, computational biology, genealogical analysis, and laboratory instrumentation continue expanding the range of evidence that can be examined successfully. While investigators acknowledge that not every cold case contains biological material suitable for advanced testing, the Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrates how sustained scientific progress can significantly enhance investigative capabilities when appropriate evidence has been preserved. The investigation further reinforces an important principle frequently emphasized by experienced detectives. Technological innovation does not replace careful investigative practice. Crime scene documentation, witness interviews, evidence preservation, chain of custody procedures, laboratory quality assurance, and objective case review remain fundamental components of successful homicide investigations. Modern forensic techniques build upon these established practices rather than substituting for them. As criminal justice professionals continued evaluating the lessons of the Sarah Yarborough investigation, the case increasingly came to represent more than the resolution of a single homicide. It demonstrated how scientific research, institutional persistence, interdisciplinary cooperation, and rigorous legal procedures can collectively influence investigations extending across multiple decades. For investigators responsible for other unresolved homicides, the case provided a practical example of how preserved evidence, combined with evolving forensic science and systematic investigative review, may create opportunities that were not available when the original crime occurred. As the investigation into the murder of Sarah Yarborough moved toward its conclusion within the judicial system, criminal justice professionals increasingly viewed the case as an illustration of the long-term evolution of homicide investigations. Rather than focusing solely on the identification of a suspect, investigators, forensic scientists, and legal scholars examine the case to better understand how scientific advances, institutional continuity, and careful investigative procedures had combined over more than 3 decades to produce evidence capable of supporting prosecution. One of the defining features of the investigation was the preservation of biological evidence collected in December 1991. Crime scene investigators working under the forensic standards of the early 1990s documented the scene, collected biological material, maintained detailed evidence inventories, and initiated chain of custody procedures that continued throughout the life of the case. At the time, those investigators could not have anticipated the future development of investigative genetic genealogy or the significant improvements that would later occur in DNA analysis. Nevertheless, their adherence to professional evidence collection practices created the foundation upon which later scientific advances depended. The investigation also demonstrates the value of periodic case review. Cold case investigations often remain inactive for extended periods because available investigative leads have been exhausted. However, inactivity does not imply abandonment. Law enforcement agencies routinely re-examine unsolved homicides when advances in forensic science, digital record systems, or investigative methodology create new opportunities. In the Sarah Yarborough investigation, successive reviews allowed detectives to evaluate emerging scientific techniques while preserving continuity with the original investigative work. Another important lesson concerns the relationship between forensic science and investigative objectivity. Throughout the renewed investigation, detectives avoided treating any single scientific development as conclusive on its own. Investigative genetic genealogy generated leads requiring verification. Laboratory DNA analysis confirmed genetic associations through validated forensic procedures. Detectives then compared those scientific findings with historical investigative records, geographic information, witness statements, and other documented evidence. This layered approach reflects accepted investigative practice by requiring independent corroboration before significant investigative decisions are made. Professional forensic organizations have frequently emphasized this distinction. Scientific methods provide information that must be interpreted within the broader context of a criminal investigation. DNA evidence may establish a biological association, but investigators remain responsible for evaluating how that evidence relates to the known circumstances of the offense. Consequently, successful homicide investigations continue integrating forensic analysis with traditional investigative techniques rather than relying exclusively upon laboratory findings. The Sarah Yarborough case has likewise informed discussions regarding laboratory quality assurance. Forensic laboratories conducting DNA analysis operate under accreditation standards requiring validated analytical methods, technical review, proficiency testing, instrument calibration, contamination prevention measures, and comprehensive documentation. These procedures are designed to ensure that scientific conclusions presented during criminal proceedings are reliable and reproducible. Long-term investigations such as this one demonstrate the importance of maintaining consistent laboratory standards as technology evolves over many years. The investigation further illustrates the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration. Detectives coordinated investigative strategy, forensic biologists performed laboratory examinations, genealogists reconstructed family relationships, prosecutors assessed legal sufficiency, evidence custodians maintained physical materials, and expert witnesses prepared scientific testimony. Each participant contributed specialized expertise while working within an integrated investigative framework. Modern homicide investigations increasingly rely upon such collaboration as forensic methods become more technically sophisticated. Educational institutions have incorporated the Sarah Yarborough investigation into curricula addressing forensic science, criminal investigation, criminology, and criminal procedure. The case offers students practical examples of evidence preservation, cold case methodology, DNA technology, genealogy, assisted investigation, prosecutorial decision-making, and judicial oversight. Rather than serving solely as a historical account of one investigation, the case functions as a teaching resource illustrating broader principles applicable to many complex criminal investigations. The investigation also contributed to policy discussions concerning evidence retention. Across the United States, law enforcement agencies have increasingly recognized that biological evidence from unsolved violent crimes may remain scientifically valuable for decades. Consequently, agencies continue refining procedures governing evidence packaging, environmental storage conditions, digital inventory systems, and long-term documentation. The Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrates how careful evidence preservation can create investigative opportunities many years after the original crime. Another area of continuing discussion involves the responsible use of investigative genetic genealogy. Since the methodology became more widely known, professional organizations have developed guidance concerning case selection, documentation standards, privacy considerations, informed consent policies established by participating databases, and appropriate legal oversight. Investigators emphasize that genealogy is most effective when combined with traditional police work and confirmatory forensic testing. The Sarah Yarborough investigation forms part of the broader body of experience informing these developing professional standards. The case likewise illustrates the importance of maintaining comprehensive investigative records. Over more than 30 years, numerous detectives participated in the investigation. Detailed reports prepared by earlier investigators enabled later personnel to understand historical decisions, evaluate previous leads, and incorporate new forensic findings without losing continuity. Such documentation represents an essential component of effective cold case investigation because investigative knowledge must often survive multiple personnel transitions. From a broader criminal justice perspective, the investigation reflects the continuing evolution of homicide investigation during the past several decades. When the murder occurred in 1991, forensic DNA analysis remained relatively new. By the time investigators identified a suspect, molecular genetics, digital record systems, computational analysis, and genealogy-assisted investigation had significantly expanded investigative capabilities. Yet throughout these technological changes, the fundamental principles of homicide investigation, careful evidence collection, objective analysis, comprehensive documentation, and legal accountability remained unchanged. The Sarah Yarborough investigation, therefore, occupies an important place within the history of forensic science, not because it relied upon any single technological breakthrough, but because it demonstrates how scientific innovation and traditional investigative practice can reinforce one another over extended periods. Every stage of the investigation, from the original crime scene examination to modern laboratory analysis and judicial review, depended upon professional standards developed across multiple disciplines working together toward a common investigative objective. As forensic science continues advancing, investigators increasingly recognize that unresolved homicide investigations should be viewed as evolving inquiries rather than permanently unsolved cases. New analytical techniques, improved laboratory instrumentation, expanded genealogical resources, and advances in computational biology continue creating opportunities to revisit preserved evidence using methods unavailable during earlier investigations. The Sarah Yarborough case remains a frequently cited example of this principle, illustrating how scientific progress, combined with meticulous evidence preservation and sustained institutional commitment, can reshape the investigative possibilities associated with historical homicide cases while remaining firmly grounded in objective, evidence-based criminal investigation. As legal proceedings continued in the Sarah Yarborough homicide case, the investigation became increasingly recognized within the criminal justice community as an example of the changing relationship between forensic science and homicide investigation. The resolution of the case reflected not only advances in DNA technology, but also decades of careful investigative work, systematic evidence preservation, and collaboration among multiple disciplines. Rather than representing a single scientific breakthrough, the investigation demonstrated how progress in criminal justice often results from the accumulation of incremental developments over many years. One of the most significant aspects of the investigation was the preservation of institutional knowledge. During the more than 30 years between the homicide and the prosecution, numerous detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, evidence custodians, and laboratory personnel contributed to the case. Many of those originally involved retired or transferred before the investigation reached its final stages. Comprehensive investigative reports, evidence inventories, laboratory documentation, and witness interview records therefore became essential resources, allowing subsequent investigators to understand previous findings and continue the investigation without losing historical continuity. This continuity illustrates an important principle of major homicide investigations. Investigative success frequently depends upon accurate documentation prepared long before scientific advances become available. Reports completed during the initial investigation may later provide context for interpreting newly developed forensic evidence. Similarly, evidence inventories and chain of custody records preserve confidence that physical evidence has remained secure throughout extended periods of storage. In the Sarah Yarborough investigation, these administrative functions proved just as important as the scientific analyses performed decades later. The case also demonstrates the continuing evolution of forensic biology. Since the early 1990s, laboratories have introduced significant improvements in DNA extraction techniques, amplification chemistry, sequencing technologies, contamination detection, probabilistic interpretation, and quality assurance procedures. These developments have increased both the sensitivity and reliability of forensic DNA analysis, allowing scientists to examine biological material that previously yielded limited or inconclusive results. Such advances have transformed the investigation of historical homicide cases across North America. Investigative genetic genealogy represented another important development reflected in the case. The methodology combines genetic analysis with historical genealogical research to generate investigative leads when traditional law enforcement databases do not identify a suspect. Genealogists reconstruct extended family relationships using publicly available historical records, while detectives evaluate those findings alongside conventional investigative evidence. Importantly, genealogy serves only as an investigative tool. Confirmatory forensic testing and traditional investigative procedures remain essential before criminal charges are pursued. The Sarah Yarborough investigation reinforced this distinction throughout the legal proceedings. Scientific evidence presented during prosecution relied upon direct forensic DNA comparison performed by accredited laboratories rather than genealogical inference alone. Expert witnesses explained laboratory procedures, quality control measures, and statistical interpretation to assist the court in evaluating the scientific evidence. These explanations reflected established forensic practice emphasizing transparency, reproducibility, and adherence to validated analytical methods. The judicial process also highlighted the role of procedural safeguards in modern criminal justice. Scientific evidence is subject to legal scrutiny before it may be considered during criminal proceedings. Courts evaluate questions concerning admissibility, expert qualifications, evidentiary relevance, and procedural compliance according to established legal standards. These safeguards help ensure that scientific developments are incorporated responsibly into judicial proceedings while protecting the rights of all parties involved. From a policy perspective, the investigation contributed to broader discussions regarding evidence retention and cold case review. Law enforcement agencies increasingly recognize that preserved biological evidence may acquire additional investigative value as laboratory science continues advancing. Consequently, many jurisdictions have strengthened policies governing evidence preservation, digital records management, periodic cold case assessment, and laboratory collaboration. The Sarah Yarborough investigation provides a practical illustration of the long-term benefits associated with these administrative practices. The investigation also underscores the importance of interdisciplinary communication. Detectives coordinated investigative strategy, forensic biologists conducted laboratory analyses, genealogists developed investigative leads, prosecutors assessed legal sufficiency, evidence custodians preserved physical materials, and laboratory experts prepared scientific testimony. Effective communication among these disciplines allowed scientific findings to be integrated with traditional investigative work while maintaining evidentiary integrity throughout the criminal justice process. Educational institutions frequently reference the investigation when discussing modern homicide investigation. Courses in forensic science, criminology, criminal investigation, and criminal procedure use the case to illustrate evidence preservation, DNA technology, genealogy, assisted investigation, prosecutorial review, and judicial evaluation of scientific evidence. Students examining the case gain insight into the practical application of forensic science within complex criminal investigations extending across multiple decades. The broader forensic community has likewise drawn important lessons from the investigation. Scientists continue refining laboratory methods capable of recovering useful DNA profiles from increasingly challenging biological samples. Researchers examine new approaches to sequencing, computational analysis, contamination detection, and statistical interpretation. These scientific developments expand the range of evidence suitable for forensic examination while reinforcing the importance of rigorous laboratory quality assurance and standardized analytical procedures. The investigation also demonstrates that technological innovation cannot substitute for careful investigative practice. Crime scene documentation, witness interviews, evidence preservation, chain of custody management, laboratory accreditation, and objective case review remain fundamental components of successful homicide investigations regardless of technological advancement. The scientific breakthroughs associated with the Sarah Yarborough investigation were effective because they built upon investigative work completed carefully and systematically in 1991. For law enforcement agencies responsible for unresolved homicides, the case offers a practical framework for evaluating historical investigations. Evidence should be preserved according to professional standards, investigative records maintained comprehensively, cold cases reviewed periodically, and emerging scientific techniques considered whenever appropriate. At the same time, investigators must continue applying traditional investigative principles, ensuring that scientific findings are interpreted within the broader factual context established by the available evidence. Ultimately, the Sarah Yarborough investigation illustrates how the criminal justice system adapts to scientific progress while maintaining continuity with established legal and investigative principles. The evidence collected during the original investigation remained meaningful because it was preserved carefully, documented thoroughly, and re-examined systematically as forensic capabilities evolved. Advances in DNA analysis and investigative genetic genealogy expanded investigative opportunities, but they operated within a framework defined by objective investigation, scientific validation, judicial oversight, and procedural fairness. The case, therefore, remains an important example of how modern forensic science can support long-term homicide investigations while reinforcing the enduring principles upon which effective criminal justice depends. As the criminal proceedings relating to the Sarah Yarborough investigation drew closer to their conclusion, the case increasingly came to be viewed as a landmark example of the role that scientific innovation can play in long-term homicide investigations. More than 3 decades had passed between the murder in December 1991 and the legal resolution of the case. During that period, advances in forensic biology, improvements in evidence management, and the emergence of investigative genetic genealogy significantly expanded the investigative tools available to law enforcement. At the same time, the investigation demonstrated that these scientific developments are most effective when supported by careful documentation, disciplined investigative practice, and rigorous legal oversight. One of the most important aspects of the investigation involved the continuity of evidence management. Evidence collected during the original homicide investigation remained securely preserved through multiple changes in investigative personnel, forensic laboratories, and technological capabilities. Maintaining that continuity required comprehensive evidence inventories, detailed chain of custody documentation, standardized storage procedures, and periodic administrative review. These responsibilities, often performed outside public attention, became essential factors in allowing modern forensic analysis to be conducted decades after the crime occurred. The investigation also highlighted the value of systematic case review. Cold case investigations are periodically reassessed, not because earlier investigators necessarily made errors, but because scientific capabilities continue evolving. Methods unavailable during one decade may become routine during the next. Consequently, many law enforcement agencies conduct structured reviews of unresolved homicides whenever significant developments occur in forensic science, laboratory technology, digital information systems, or investigative methodology. The Sarah Yarborough investigation reflects this broader practice of reassessing historical evidence as new analytical opportunities emerge. Within forensic science, the case has become an example of the practical application of DNA technology across multiple generations of laboratory development. Early DNA analysis provided investigators with valuable information, but was constrained by the scientific capabilities available during the 1990s. Subsequent improvements in extraction methods, amplification chemistry, sequencing technologies, contamination detection, and statistical analysis gradually increased the amount of information recoverable from preserved biological evidence. Rather than replacing earlier forensic work, these advances built directly upon evidence collected and preserved during the original investigation. Investigative genetic genealogy likewise occupies an important place within the history of the case. The methodology illustrates how scientific research and historical documentation can be combined to generate investigative leads when traditional forensic database searches do not identify a suspect. Genealogists reconstruct extended family relationships using publicly available historical records, while detectives compare those findings with established investigative evidence. This collaborative approach expands investigative possibilities, but remains subject to verification through conventional forensic testing and judicial review. The distinction between investigative methods and courtroom evidence remains central throughout the legal proceedings. Genealogical analysis assisted investigators during the investigative phase by narrowing the field of possible individuals associated with the unknown DNA profile. Direct forensic DNA comparison, however, provided the scientific evidence evaluated within the criminal justice process. This distinction reflects accepted professional practice and has influenced guidance developed by forensic organizations concerning the responsible use of investigative genetic genealogy. The Sarah Yarborough investigation also demonstrates the importance of interdisciplinary cooperation. Detectives coordinated investigative strategy, forensic biologists conducted laboratory examinations, genealogists performed historical research, prosecutors evaluated legal sufficiency, evidence custodians maintained physical materials, and expert witnesses explained scientific findings during legal proceedings. Each discipline contributed specialized expertise while operating within established investigative and judicial frameworks. Modern homicide investigations increasingly depend upon this type of coordinated professional collaboration. Educational organizations continue examining the investigation because it illustrates several foundational principles of criminal investigation. Students studying forensic science, criminology, criminal procedure, and investigative methodology frequently analyze the case to understand evidence preservation, DNA technology, cold case management, genealogy, assisted investigation, and judicial evaluation of scientific evidence. The case, therefore, serves not only as a historical investigation, but also as a practical educational resource demonstrating the interaction between science and criminal justice. Professional associations have similarly drawn lessons from the investigation when developing guidance concerning cold case investigations. Recommendations emphasize preserving biological evidence whenever feasible, maintaining comprehensive documentation, conducting periodic case reassessment, collaborating with accredited forensic laboratories, and integrating emerging scientific techniques with established investigative procedures. These recommendations recognize that unresolved homicide investigations may benefit from scientific developments many years after the original offense. The investigation further illustrates the importance of laboratory accreditation and quality assurance. Forensic laboratories conducting DNA analysis operate under standardized procedures governing validation, contamination prevention, proficiency testing, technical review, instrument calibration, and documentation. These safeguards ensure that scientific findings presented within judicial proceedings satisfy accepted professional standards. Long-term investigations, such as the Sarah Yarborough case, reinforce the necessity of maintaining these standards consistently over extended periods. Public attention surrounding the investigation also contributed to broader discussions concerning investment in forensic science. Governments and criminal justice agencies increasingly recognize that advances in laboratory technology, evidence management systems, specialized training, and cold case investigative units can significantly enhance the ability to review historical homicide investigations. While scientific innovation cannot resolve every cold case, the Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrates the value of maintaining institutional capacity to apply emerging technologies whenever preserved evidence supports additional analysis. Researchers continue examining investigations such as this one as forensic capabilities evolve further. New developments in DNA sequencing, computational biology, bioinformatics, and analytical instrumentation continue expanding the range of biological evidence that may be examined successfully. At the same time, investigators emphasize that technological advancement does not eliminate the need for careful crime scene investigation, objective analysis, comprehensive documentation, and adherence to legal standards. Scientific innovation remains most effective when integrated with these long-standing investigative principles. Ultimately, the Sarah Yarborough investigation illustrates the cumulative nature of progress within criminal justice. No single scientific development, investigative decision, or technological breakthrough resolved the case independently. Instead, the outcome reflected decades of careful evidence preservation, continuous scientific advancement, interdisciplinary collaboration, methodical investigative review, and judicial oversight. The investigation therefore remains significant, not only because it resolved a long unsolved homicide, but also because it demonstrates how patient, Evidence-based investigation can adapt to scientific progress while preserving the integrity of the criminal justice process. Following the resolution of the Sarah Yarborough investigation, criminal justice professionals increasingly examined the case as an example of how scientific innovation can influence the investigation of serious violent crime while remaining subject to established legal and investigative standards. Although public attention often centered on the role of DNA technology in investigative genetic genealogy, the broader significance of the case lies in the interaction between scientific progress, institutional continuity, evidence preservation, and multidisciplinary cooperation developed over more than 3 decades. One of the principal lessons concerns the long-term preservation of evidence. The biological material collected during the original investigation in December 1991 remained suitable for advanced forensic analysis because investigators followed established evidence collection procedures and maintained secure storage throughout the life of the case. Proper packaging, detailed chain of custody documentation, environmental controls were appropriate, and comprehensive inventory systems ensured that later laboratory examinations could be conducted without compromising evidentiary integrity. These practices have become increasingly important as forensic science continues expanding the analytical value of preserved biological material. The case also demonstrates the importance of institutional memory within law enforcement agencies. Major homicide investigations frequently extend beyond the careers of the investigators originally assigned to them. Detectives retire, laboratory personnel change assignments, prosecutors transition to different responsibilities, and organizational structures evolve over time. Detailed investigative reports, crime scene documentation, laboratory records, evidence inventories, interview summaries, and prosecutorial files preserve knowledge accumulated throughout the investigation, allowing future investigators to understand earlier decisions and continue the inquiry without unnecessary duplication of effort. Advances in forensic science played a central role throughout the later stages of the investigation. Since the early 1990s, laboratory methods have improved substantially in areas including DNA extraction, amplification, sequencing, contamination detection, statistical interpretation, and quality assurance. These scientific developments have enabled laboratories to obtain increasingly reliable information from biological evidence that earlier technologies could not analyze successfully. The Sarah Yarborough investigation illustrates how preserved evidence may acquire new investigative value as laboratory capabilities evolve over time. Investigative genetic genealogy likewise represents an important development reflected in the case. By combining forensic genetics with historical genealogical research, investigators gained access to investigative leads unavailable through traditional DNA database searches alone. However, the investigation also reinforces an essential professional distinction. Genealogy serves as an investigative tool rather than definitive courtroom evidence. The detectives use genealogical findings to identify a potential suspect, but direct forensic DNA comparison, conducted according to validated laboratory procedures, provided the scientific evidence ultimately evaluated during judicial proceedings. The investigation has contributed to broader discussions regarding professional standards governing genealogy-assisted investigations. Law enforcement agencies, forensic organizations, legal scholars, and policymakers continue refining guidance addressing documentation, case selection, privacy considerations, informed consent policies adopted by genealogy database participants, and judicial oversight. The Sarah Yarborough case forms part of the growing body of practical experience informing these evolving professional standards. From a legal perspective, the investigation illustrates how scientific innovation is incorporated into criminal proceedings through established judicial safeguards. Courts evaluate forensic evidence according to rules governing admissibility, reliability, expert testimony, and procedural compliance. Scientific conclusions presented during prosecution remain subject to examination by both parties and independent judicial review. This process ensures that advances in forensic science strengthen rather than diminish procedural fairness within the criminal justice system. Another important aspect of the investigation involves interdisciplinary collaboration. Detectives coordinated investigative strategy, forensic biologists conducted laboratory analyses, genealogists reconstructed historical family relationships, prosecutors evaluated legal sufficiency, evidence custodians preserved physical materials, and expert witnesses explained scientific findings during court proceedings. Effective communication among these disciplines allowed scientific developments to be integrated systematically into the investigation while maintaining consistency with established investigative and legal principles. The Sarah Yarborough investigation also serves as a valuable educational resource. Universities, police academies, forensic science programs, and continuing professional education courses frequently examine the case to illustrate evidence preservation, cold case methodology, DNA analysis, investigative genetic genealogy, prosecutorial review, and judicial evaluation of scientific evidence. Students and practitioners alike study the investigation not simply because of its outcome, but because it demonstrates how multiple disciplines can cooperate effectively across an extended period. Professional organizations have similarly incorporated lessons from the investigation into recommendations concerning cold case management. These recommendations emphasize preserving biological evidence whenever feasible, maintaining comprehensive documentation, conducting periodic investigative review, collaborating with accredited forensic laboratories, and monitoring scientific developments that may create future investigative opportunities. Such guidance reflects growing recognition that unresolved homicide investigations may remain scientifically viable for decades. The case further underscores the importance of forensic laboratory accreditation. Accredited laboratories operate under validated analytical procedures supported by proficiency testing, quality control systems, technical review, instrument calibration, contamination prevention measures, and standardized documentation practices. These safeguards help ensure that forensic conclusions presented during criminal proceedings satisfy accepted scientific standards. Long-term investigations, such as the Sarah Yarborough case, highlight the value of maintaining these standards consistently despite continual technological advancement. The broader impact of the investigation extends beyond a single criminal case. Governments and law enforcement agencies increasingly invest in forensic laboratory infrastructure, evidence storage systems, digital case management, specialized cold case units, and scientific training. These investments reflect recognition that careful evidence preservation and evolving forensic capabilities may create opportunities to resolve investigations previously considered unsolvable. While not every cold case contains evidence suitable for advanced DNA analysis or genealogy-assisted investigation, the Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrates the importance of preserving future investigative possibilities whenever evidence allows. Researchers continue examining similar investigations as forensic science advances further. Improvements in DNA sequencing, computational biology, analytical chemistry, bioinformatics, and laboratory instrumentation continue expanding the range of biological evidence suitable for forensic examination. Nevertheless, investigators consistently emphasize that scientific innovation functions most effectively when supported by careful crime scene investigation, comprehensive documentation, objective analysis, and adherence to legal procedures. The Sarah Yarborough investigation reinforces this principle by demonstrating that technological progress builds upon, not replaces, the foundational practices established during the earliest stages of a homicide investigation. Today, the investigation remains a significant reference point within forensic science and criminal justice education. It illustrates how evidence preserved according to professional standards can retain investigative value across decades, how interdisciplinary collaboration strengthens complex investigations, and how emerging scientific techniques can be integrated responsibly within established legal frameworks. As new forensic technologies continue developing, the Sarah Yarborough investigation serves as a reminder that the successful resolution of long-term homicide investigations depends upon sustained institutional commitment, rigorous scientific practice, meticulous documentation, and an unwavering commitment to objective, evidence-based investigation. More than 3 decades after the murder of Sarah Yarborough, the investigation continues to be studied as an example of the evolution of forensic science, homicide investigation, and cold case management in the United States. Its significance extends beyond the prosecution of a single case. Investigators, forensic scientists, prosecutors, educators, and policymakers frequently reference the investigation when discussing how scientific innovation, careful evidence preservation, and institutional persistence can combine to support the investigation of historical violent crimes. A defining feature of the investigation was the quality of the original crime scene work. Crime scene investigators responding in December 1991 documented the location, collected biological evidence, photographed the scene, prepared detailed reports, and established chain of custody procedures according to the professional standards of the time. Although the scientific tools available in the early 1990s were far less advanced than those used decades later, the evidence was collected and preserved in a manner that allowed future generations of forensic scientists to re-examine it using technologies that had not yet been developed. The investigation also illustrates the importance of long-term evidence retention policies. Biological evidence from homicide investigations may remain scientifically valuable for many years, provided that it is stored appropriately and accompanied by complete documentation. Secure evidence storage, inventory management, environmental controls where necessary, and continuous chain of custody records all contributed to preserving the evidentiary integrity required for later forensic testing. These administrative practices, although often receiving little public attention, proved essential to the eventual progress of the investigation. Another important lesson concerns the preservation of investigative knowledge. During the more than 30 years separating the homicide from the legal resolution of the case, numerous detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, laboratory analysts, and evidence custodians participated in the investigation. Comprehensive reports prepared throughout the investigation allowed each new investigative team to understand previous findings, evaluate earlier decisions objectively, and incorporate new scientific developments without losing continuity. This preservation of institutional memory represents a fundamental principle of successful long-term investigations. Within forensic science, the Sarah Yarborough investigation reflects the extraordinary pace of technological advancement since the early 1990s. Improvements in DNA extraction, amplification, sequencing, contamination control, probabilistic interpretation, and laboratory quality assurance have dramatically expanded the amount of information recoverable from biological evidence. These developments did not diminish the importance of the original investigation. Instead, they increased the scientific value of evidence that had been carefully preserved from the beginning. The case has also contributed to ongoing professional discussions regarding investigative genetic genealogy. As more law enforcement agencies evaluate genealogy-assisted investigations, organizations responsible for forensic standards continue developing guidance addressing case selection, documentation, quality assurance, privacy protections, informed consent policies adopted by genealogy databases, and legal oversight. The Sarah Yarborough investigation forms part of the growing body of experience informing these professional recommendations. Importantly, the investigation demonstrates that genealogy-assisted investigation operates within the broader framework of traditional criminal investigation. Genealogical research generated investigative leads that required independent verification through conventional police work, forensic DNA comparison, documentary research, and legal review. This process reinforces the principle that scientific innovation complements rather than replaces established investigative methods. Detectives remained responsible for evaluating all available evidence objectively before prosecutorial decisions were made. The judicial proceedings associated with the investigation further illustrate the role of procedural safeguards within the criminal justice system. Scientific evidence introduced during criminal trials is evaluated according to established evidentiary standards governing admissibility, reliability, relevance, and expert testimony. Courts provide an independent forum in which scientific findings may be examined through adversarial testing, ensuring that technological advances remain subject to constitutional protections and procedural fairness. Educational institutions frequently examine the investigation because it illustrates numerous aspects of modern criminal justice practice. Students studying forensic science, criminology, criminal investigation, criminal procedure, and legal studies analyze the case to understand evidence preservation, laboratory analysis, genealogy, assisted investigation, prosecutorial decision-making, and judicial review. The investigation serves not only as a historical example, but also as a practical teaching resource demonstrating the interaction between science and law. Professional organizations have likewise incorporated lessons from the investigation into recommendations concerning cold case investigation. These recommendations encourage agencies to preserve biological evidence whenever possible, maintain comprehensive investigative documentation, conduct periodic reviews of unresolved homicides, collaborate with accredited forensic laboratories, and remain informed regarding scientific developments that may enhance future investigative capabilities. Such guidance reflects growing recognition that unresolved cases should remain scientifically accessible as forensic technologies continue evolving. The Sarah Yarborough investigation also illustrates the importance of laboratory accreditation and scientific quality assurance. Accredited forensic laboratories operate under standardized procedures requiring method validation, proficiency testing, contamination prevention, technical review, instrument maintenance, and detailed documentation. These safeguards support the reliability of scientific conclusions presented during criminal proceedings and reinforce public confidence in forensic evidence used by the justice system. Beyond its immediate legal significance, the investigation has influenced broader policy discussions concerning investment in forensic science and cold case investigation. Governments and law enforcement agencies increasingly recognize the value of maintaining modern forensic laboratories, secure evidence storage facilities, digital records management systems, specialized investigative personnel, and continuing professional education. Such investments help ensure that preserved evidence remains available for examination as scientific capabilities continue advancing. Researchers continue examining cases such as the Sarah Yarborough investigation to evaluate emerging forensic methodologies. Ongoing developments in DNA sequencing, computational biology, bioinformatics, analytical chemistry, and digital investigation continue expanding the range of evidence suitable for scientific examination. At the same time, investigators emphasize that technological progress remains most effective when supported by careful crime scene documentation, evidence preservation, objective analysis, and adherence to legal standards. Ultimately, the Sarah Yarborough investigation represents the convergence of scientific progress and professional investigative practice. The careful work performed during the original investigation created the evidentiary foundation upon which later forensic advances could build. Decades of institutional commitment preserved both the evidence and the investigative record. Emerging technologies expanded analytical capabilities, while the criminal justice system ensured that scientific findings were evaluated through established legal procedures. For these reasons, the case continues to serve as an influential example for investigators, forensic scientists, prosecutors, educators, and policymakers seeking to understand how modern forensic science can strengthen the investigation of historical homicide cases while preserving the fundamental principles of objective, evidence-based criminal justice. The investigation into the murder of Sarah Yarborough occupies an important place in the history of modern forensic science and cold case investigation in the United States. More than 30 years separated the events of December 1991 from the eventual resolution of the criminal case. During those decades, advances in laboratory science, improvements in evidence management, and the development of investigative genetic genealogy fundamentally changed the investigative possibilities available to law enforcement. Yet the case also demonstrates that scientific progress alone is never sufficient. Every forensic advancement depended upon the careful work performed by investigators during the earliest stages of the investigation and upon the consistent preservation of evidence over many years. The original investigation established the foundation for everything that followed. Crime scene investigators documented the location, collected biological evidence, photographed the scene, prepared detailed reports, and maintained chain of custody records according to the professional standards available at the time. Although DNA technology was still in its early stages, investigators recognized the importance of preserving every item of potential evidentiary value. Their decisions ensured that future generations of forensic scientists would have access to evidence capable of benefiting from technological developments that could not have been anticipated in 1991. One of the principal lessons of the Sarah Yarborough investigation concerns the importance of long-term evidence preservation. Biological material associated with serious violent crimes may remain scientifically valuable for decades when collected, packaged, documented, and stored according to accepted forensic procedures. Throughout the investigation, evidence custodians maintained detailed inventories, documented every transfer of custody, and ensured that physical evidence remained suitable for future laboratory analysis. These administrative responsibilities, though often less visible than investigative breakthroughs, proved essential to the eventual progress of the case. The investigation also demonstrates the value of institutional continuity within criminal justice agencies. Major homicide investigations frequently outlast the careers of the detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, and laboratory personnel initially assigned to them. Detailed investigative reports, witness interviews, laboratory records, crime scene diagrams, and evidence inventories preserve institutional knowledge across decades, allowing future investigators to understand earlier findings while incorporating new scientific techniques into existing investigations. The Sarah Yarborough case illustrates how careful documentation allows criminal investigations to evolve without losing their evidentiary integrity. Advances in forensic science represented another defining feature of the investigation. Since the early 1990s, laboratory capabilities have expanded dramatically through improvements in DNA extraction, amplification, sequencing, contamination control, statistical interpretation, and quality assurance. These developments increased the amount of information recoverable from preserved biological evidence and expanded the investigative opportunities available in historical homicide cases. The Sarah Yarborough investigation demonstrates how scientific progress can transform evidence collected decades earlier into valuable investigative material. Investigative genetic genealogy likewise became an important component of the investigation. By combining forensic genetics with traditional genealogical research, investigators developed investigative leads that could not have been identified through conventional law enforcement databases alone. However, the investigation also reinforced an important professional principle. Genealogy generates investigative leads rather than establishing criminal responsibility. Confirmatory forensic DNA testing, conducted according to validated laboratory procedures, remained necessary before prosecutors could proceed with criminal charges. This distinction continues guiding professional standards governing the use of investigative genetic genealogy throughout the United States. The judicial proceedings further illustrate how scientific innovation is incorporated into established legal frameworks. Courts has evaluated forensic evidence according to long-standing principles governing admissibility, reliability, relevance, and expert testimony. Scientific findings